figure locks on your door, tie guns, close yourself off. The eyes of love. Instead, see all of us as one. Here's what we can do to change the world right now to a better ride. Take all that money we spend on weapons and defense each year and instead spend it feeding, clothing, and educating the poor of the world, which it would many times over, not one human being excluded, and we can explore space together, both inner and outer, forever.
Y'all asked for it. He's here. For real this time. Actually happened. Yeah, I know. We've been talking about it. If you're a patron of RetroBlasting, you knew that we've talked about doing this for about a month and a half now. Longer than that, technically, but you heard about it for the first time about a month and a half ago. My schedule's crazy, his schedule's crazy, and the combined insanity has been such that finally we're able to get there. So without further ado, I bring you the one, the only Michael French of RetroBlasting.
Hi. So where on earth did you find a rock cover of that Kylie Minogue single? Like, how did you do that?
My Google foo is strong, Michael. My Google foo is very strong. The Chia set YouTube. It's just YouTube. You go looking, and it took me about 20 minutes to find something suitable. And I compared them to the original. I'm like, okay, I don't want it to go too far off the beaten path. I didn't want like an extreme metal cover where it's like, and I didn't think that was going to work because you wouldn't recognize it. But I was watching your face. I was like, okay, I want to see when the recognition comes in.
Yeah.
And then you went,
I was kind of sitting there and I was like, what? Huh? What? Biscuit? You know, and then
well, you know, your dedication to that artist is so readily apparent. It's right there in the forefront. And I have obsessions with music artists too.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Yeah.
So it was just like, well, I gotta do this for Michael. I don't want to go the obvious route where it's going to be like, it's too obvious. I want to just kind of, swimming in there a little bit.
No, it was quite the, I was like, no way. And then I was like, wait. Oh man, let's see if I can guess real quick. If I reach up here and guess, let's see, is it this one? Yep. Oh, I'm so good at that. So, so that comes from Light Years, which is her album from 2000, and On a Night Like This is the second track right there. So there you go.
Yeah, you can, if you know the right search terms, you can find a metal cover of just about anything, and that's the honest to goodness truth.
Kudos
so,
to you, golf clap.
Well, hey, it was a salute to you, my friend. So, as you know, and as we've made very clear in all the promotion for this stream, we're going to talk about everything but toys. Now, not to the place where this is like the video version of Operation, where someone says the T word, like we have to like drink or some nonsense like that. That's not the case here at all. Okay. But I feel like there's always been an opportunity for you to just kind of put that bag down and just kind of talk. And you don't take that opportunity too often. So I am selfishly seizing that opportunity for myself because I want to get to know you better. So there you go. There's a few things that, and granted, this is not meant to be like a full-blown interview, but we got to start somewhere, right?
Yeah, that's fine.
So what I'm really interested in, and I'm sure you've covered this many places before, but in my exhaustive viewing of your channel, I haven't really heard this answered in detail. At what point in your life, because you've always loved film, you've always had a love of the creative process in general, which is made very clear by the quality of your videos. But at what point did you decide, okay, film school, Like, I want to make film. Like, I'm so into this. I want to make this for myself. When did that happen? Was it something you ever kind of strayed away from? Like, tell me more about that journey.
Yeah. So the stark, honest answer for that, and that's what I always do, because I don't know how to do anything else but be starkly honest. I didn't want to be a filmmaker. I wanted to be in that arena, but I didn't want to be a filmmaker. I was obsessed with, and I did not know this at the time, I thought special effects were special effects, and they shall always be done the one way and just continue to improve. I was a teenager, like I was 13, 14, and
Sure.
I loved Industrial Light and Magic. And I collected all the books. I did 2 science projects on special effects in middle school. Like every science project, I would just do special effects. And I loved building model kits. I loved learning how to airbrush paint. And, I was learning. I was by no means an expert at 14 years old, but I was learning. I was a very focused person. Like I was, I could get in the zone and then just focus.
You ultra focus on something that I would never have guessed that about
right?
you at all.
Yeah,
I
I just look like the flightiest individuals. Devil may care, and flaky. So we were living in England in the 92 to 93 period. We'd lived there since 90, but so we transitioned over into 1993. I'm concluding my last middle school year there. My father's job is taking us back to the United States. And I'm really excited because I've gotten really into making model kits. I was making Flying Fortresses, and I was making, BF 109s, and I was making, what I was really looking forward to. I made a space shuttle. I was ready to get back and buy a motion picture Enterprise model kit and finally build the refit Enterprise from Wrath of Khan. And I was actively thinking about, I want to do special effects. I want to build models and do. I loved doing stop motion with a film camera that my dad had. Like I would just try and set it up and then, waste all of his film just doing stop motion for these science projects and stuff, and then make physical flip books, because I didn't have a way to edit in video. Like it was an analog world. There was no non-linear editing software then for a consumer.
Right.
I just had Wolf camera print all the photos, and then I would put them in a big chip bag clamp, and then I would flip them, and they would, make the whole scene, whatever it was. So we get back to the United States, and 2 things occurred that stopped all that in its tracks. One, mysteriously, everything got back to the US, no problem, because some of your stuff, a very small amount of your stuff, is with you on your bags on the plane. But obviously, your furniture, your CDs, your all that stuff, that has to be put on a barge and sent back.
Right. They put it in a container and yeah.
Well, everything came back just fine, except my airbrush. My airbrush went missing. I never saw it again. And I have no idea what happened. And at that point, I went from a world where I could walk down to the local village, because in the late 90s, even then in Britain, modeling of all kinds was a big deal. Hobbyists and modeling was a big deal over there. And so I could literally walk down the street to Weybridge High Street and go into the model shop and just buy another airbrush or something if I'd lost it or something broke, or get my Humbrol paints or whatever they were. Well, now I'm a pre-driving age teenager with no car in suburban Atlanta. So I can't go places very quickly. But that wouldn't have stopped me if something else hadn't happened. And the second thing that happened was we went to the movies that summer. And even though we weren't seeing this film, I heard about a film that had come out called Jurassic Park. So I was like, oh, this movie's like a big deal. I need to read the book first. So I read the book and missed the movie that summer, but it came out in a limited engagement the next summer because it had been so popular the year of its release. So my mom and I go to see this movie the summer of 94. And I watched this movie, and because I know so much about special effects up into that point, when I saw what I saw on screen, I was like, oh, well, that's done. And that was me as a 14, 15-year-old, maybe, 15-year-old saying that, like reading the tea leaves that were very obvious and going, yeah, that's done. And I know that like Peter Jackson did some model work for Lord of the Rings with Weta and stuff like that. But most of these movies now, they're just CGI, floods. It's just computer graphics. And there was no way to really get into that at the time. 1994, 95, what exactly are you going to be able to buy? Like Corel Draw? Like, I mean, really? Like what? So I just kind of became a soul without a harbor at that point. I was like, well, when I was 7, I found out I couldn't be a intergalactic smuggler. And then I found out that archaeology is really boring for, my idea of archaeology, which was Indiana Jones. So I thought, well, I'll do the special effects thing, because that looks really cool. And then it's like, now special effects is going to be all on a computer. I knew it. Like a lot of people were like, oh, well, it won't change that fast. Yeah, it will. And so I thought, well, movies are sort of adjacent to the special effects process. So I guess I could be interested in making movies. I know that doesn't sound as passionate as people think because I do a video channel now, but it really was that way. It was like, yeah, I'm not really, I like screenwriting. Like I like writing. I like telling stories. But I kind of index on I don't know if you've heard that story about Alfred Hitchcock where his enjoyment came from writing the script. Then after he wrote the script, he found the filmmaking process to be a huge chore. And that was kind of the way I felt about it in film school. Was I was passionate about the script I'd written. So I wanted to do the best job I could. Like I didn't half-ass anything. But I do find the filmmaking process on that level very arduous and not very fun. I do enjoy the editing process for things like that. I really enjoyed editing. So I enjoy the writing and the editing. It's the part in between that is very it's a lot of both metaphorical and literal math. It's especially at the feature filmmaking level. When it works, it's a lot of fun to see it work, but the fun comes seeing it on the other end where you're looking at your footage and you don't have to reshoot anything. And that 17 hours that you spent getting those 3 shots was worth it. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Sorry. But it doesn't often come out that way. So my passion, I guess you would say, or my interest in filmmaking was this kind of Chevy Chase pratfall down a flight of cosmic stairs that led me to that. And as far as these kind of videos go, where I'm doing the stuff for my channel, I enjoy the documentary side of things a lot. I enjoy infotainment. I enjoy that kind of stuff. And so even though the shooting of it can still be a little like harumph, and then I got to go shoot this or that, it's not the way I felt in film school, because in film school, right, I was the last class at Syracuse University to shoot on 16 millimeter. So we were shooting actual celluloid film, and then we were editing on a flatbed Steenbeck and or Moviola system with all the synced reels, just kind of moving back and forth. And so that whole film was cut together by hand and tape, on a little film guillotine and doing all that stuff. So I have a real appreciation for the process of the whole thing. But the film cameras with the light meters, and you look through the viewfinder knowing that's not the way it's going to look on the film itself. You have to do the math, and the lighting for that is like, well, what stock of film am I using? And what's my f-stop at versus my shutter speed versus my this versus my that. I think there's like 3 things in my life that were less fun than that. one of them was calculus, and one of them was trying to learn a foreign language. I mean, like
But I would say that filmmaking of that style is very much calculus and learning a different language.
yes,
Because
yes,
if you step onto a film set with no prior knowledge, there's a whole jargon. It's almost on like the borderline of like your naval terminology kind of
right,
thing. Like
and
it's insane.
yeah.
And
Sorry, go ahead.
and I didn't mean to interrupt you either. Having done 2 movies, one super guerrilla, just handheld, whatever we had to do to get by, all practical effects, but there was no story. The movie's horrible.
Right.
And thankfully it's out of print, so you can't get it. So no, I'm not showing it to you. And then with the most recent one, the Game Chasers movie, we hired folks right out of Hollywood and Austin and Atlanta, and we got like good people. We got folks that worked on the Star Wars prequels and Maleficent and Game of Thrones. We got a lot of people together, so it was like a really like the crew was like, let's go. They were like hardened, and all of us, you know, for lack of a better word, chodes, walk onto the set with no real experience, just a love of film, and we have the story to tell. And by the end of the first day, you're like, oh shit, what I get into.
Yeah.
And we had a 3-week shoot, which for that script was really, really pushing it. And then we had, over the course of the last year, even with COVID, we found ways around it to do reshoots and additional shots. And those were 10 times more difficult than when you had a whole crew to support and, you know, all these different endeavors and stuff. And that's in the digital age where you're not worrying about all of these variables that you have to do. So even when all things are perfect and you have almost complete control of every little thing and you can see what it's going to look like on film, it still takes way too much longer than it should by far. So,
I mean, and also just simple tasks like loading the camera. You have to take it on faith. You do it in a blind bag, and you have to load that spool that film through, and then hope that as you're shooting all day, it's not just coiling up inside the magazine. And we had that happen once or twice on various people's shoots. And again, like I said, I like doing writing. I like doing the story. I understand the language of film. I love knowing that, yeah, I'm going to shoot this here for this shot, and then this is going to cut together with this. I can do that all day. Like, that's no problem. And video has made that a lot easier. But even with video, making that easier as far as, you know, film, what you see in the viewfinder is pretty much what you're going to get in your final file. Like, all that's great. But you're still having to worry about lighting, where the microphone's going to be placed, what's happening in the background. Is someone's reflection somewhere? Did I spot it did I not spot it until I'm already in the editor? I don't understand a lot of, I know just enough in After Effects to get by. Right. But to get by with the most rudimentary things. Like, I would love to be a special effects expert as well, like a post-production expert, whatever you want to call it, because After Effects is not digital 3D graphics, but it's post-production polish, which I would love to know how to do. But that's a practice unto itself. I would have to take 18 months off the channel just to learn After Effects.
It's funny you mentioned that, because Billy, the director and editor of our film, he did just that during COVID. It's like, well, because we got Yoshi Vu, who was one of the background effects guys on Rise of Skywalker. Right. And say what you will about that movie, but he was responsible, his team was responsible for the Death Star and all of its construction and how it looked and everything in digital, and it was great work. And I will say the craft that went into that was fine. It was just everything surrounding it, which we're not going to discuss. Well, we could, but the point being that we got some really good, but he only has so much time because he's doing 97 things at the same time. So Billy decides, okay, I need to get good at this stuff. I need to do background replacements in certain areas. I need to change scale because we had like these miniature shots of a vehicle that, you know, obviously it's not to scale. And then when you take one of those things, you put it on the road, it's not going to look right. So he had to learn, how do I magnify this and not magnify that and change this without changing the frame of the shot and replace the. And it took him all of last year to really get it down to a place where it was viable at all. And then he had to go back and redo it again. He color corrected the whole film, realized he did it wrong, had to go back and do the whole thing again. And this is somebody who is a professional video editor. That's has been his day job for 15, 20 years, something like that. And he still, when you say it's like such this really hyper focused skill, people tend to think, well, if you know the Adobe suite, then this shouldn't be that hard to learn. You're right, it shouldn't, but it is.
But it is.
And
they look like I constantly lean on not even the stuff I learned in film school, the stuff I was learning for fun about analog effects. Like I lean on analog effects theory just to try and jury rig things together when I need something in a pinch for an effect. So I try and do as much in camera as I can on my stuff because I know. So for example, they, like you just said, they talk about all you need to do is know Adobe Suite. It's like, well, yes and no, because Adobe Suite, each program has its own language, even though they're all supposed to link together. So Adobe After Effects, the frustration doesn't come from not knowing in theory how to do an effect. It comes from bashing my head against the wall, even now, not being able to get Adobe Premiere and or After Effects to simply just cut a square out of a thing and do a matte. It's like, why is this not intuitive for me? And I'm like, well, it must be after 9 years because I still come from a very analog studied background of how to do this in the language of a computer program like that with their little icons and their little fancy names for things. And it doesn't come naturally to me. So I have to look up, even for something simple, like if you and I were recording this and then we played it back in post, and you were like, when he says Kylie Minogue, I'm going to darken the whole screen except for a little vignette that's over Kylie's head right there. Like I'm going to just put a feathered edge, right? That's a matte with a circle and then you feather the edge, right? I have to look up how to do that every single time because it's not something that comes natural to me. So a lot of times what I'll do, like I said, is I'll just use my analog experience and then go over to Photoshop and Band-Aid something together just to get by on what I need. There was a Broken Vader scene. Technically, he's a character, not a toy. So he's part of our crew. So I think I'm getting by on that rule today. There was a Broken Vader scene where Melinda was filming it. And Broken Vader and I were doing our scene together. And then when I got into post, I realized, oh, well, Melinda was sitting there operating the camera, and you can just see her in the fireplace glass reflection past my shoulder. She's just right there in like a bright red t-shirt. And I'm like, well, I can't have that. So I thought, what am I going to do? And I'm like, well, I don't know After Effects because I could go figure it out. It'll take me 7 hours. Or since it was a locked shot and not handheld, I will take a still frame of this before she sat down because I had a few frames of it without her in the reflection. And then I will go into Photoshop and I will cut that patch out and I will drop that patch over everything in the shot in Premiere. It's primitive, but it's the way the old school guys did it analog. And it worked just fine. So that's how I kind of survive. Like I just kind of, Sorry for that really long answer. But...
No. I asked you a detailed question and I got a detailed answer. That's how this works. Because you and I come from the same stock in more ways than one. Like you're 78. You were born 78, right?
Yep.
Or 80? 78. So we're less than a year apart. I was born in 77. So like we're right there. Both coming from families that travel a lot. So you kind of have to like reinvent yourself everywhere you go. Certain things, and it's kind of like I look at that kind of a lifestyle as just like when you're moving a lot, you tend to live as small as you can without compromising anything. I think with our personalities, it's much of the same. There's things that you can leave behind and reinvent and so forth. And from what I can gather, and then I'm going to lead up to this big question, then I'm going to check in with chat, and then we'll come back to it.
Sure.
But it feels to me like the biggest imprint on your psyche came from that move from the States over to Britain and then back. And so I want you to think about that. We're going to explore that here in a second, but I need to check in with chat
Yep.
because they're going
Go
nuts.
right ahead, sir.
And speaking of Melinda, she says Facebook is back up miraculously. I knew that civilization would not fall. I knew it's okay, and I'm glad. I thank you, and you shared the link on the page. Appreciate that. Means a lot. But I see a ton of people in chat here. I'm just going to kind of go down. If I missed anybody, I apologize. If you're new here, hey, welcome. We're glad to have you. But I see Keith Knight, Anthony Whitehead, Scuba Pete, Cal L48, Kieran Ball, Bjorn Jorgensen, Tim Hayes, Carl Rudy, just a ton of people. I know Sal is in here, so hey man, how you doing? Hoping that all is well with you as well, my friend. I see Chazilla, Raymond Huey. The list goes on. I can't get to all of you. I see Nerd Rage as well. So Dean is in here. It's kind of an all-star cast of who's who around here, and a few new folks it looks like as well. So it's really cool to have you. Thank you for being here. I will be highlighting comments as we go through, but we're just getting started. So that transition from the States to Britain and back, how did that affect you? What did you leave behind in the States the first time out? What did you bring back from Britain?
Well, I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee. I was born in Nashville, and then I lived very briefly in Mount Juliet when I was real little, which is adjacent to Nashville. And then we lived in Nashville suburban proper my whole life up until that point. And yeah, I'd been to Washington, D.C. once, and I'd been to Gulf Shores, Alabama, and I'd been to Disney World, stuff like that. But so I was batting a good average, but I'd never been out of the country. It was odd because at the time I was in my 6th grade year. I had come out of 5 years of convent school. So I was going to school dressed like Harry Potter in the United States and going to a convent, a literal turn of the century convent that had been converted partially into a school. And it still had the creaky old floors, where the nuns would creep around upstairs, and the big wooden fixtures and everything like that. We'd have mass and all that kind of stuff. So my 6th grade year, my 5th grade year, it got so bad that my mom and dad put me in a child psychologist's office to find out what was going on, because I wasn't telling them anything. And come to find out, I knew this, but my mom says that I was very stoic, like not stoic in the sense that I was like a cold individual. I had my emotions and everything, but when it came to school, I just wouldn't tell her things because I thought that if I told her things, I always blamed myself. I think that's something that came from my family. My dad has a Catholic background, and my mom has a Protestant background, and my dad has a lot of that Catholic guilt that comes with it. Everything's shameful, and even though he doesn't really practice all that heavily, it's still ingrained into you. It's this whole idea that anything that happens that's bad, even if you were 50 miles away from it, somehow it's your fault, and you've got to make it right. And so I just never told them, apparently, anything that was going on at school. But what was happening is that the nuns and the other teachers had singled me out for ridicule, and it had been going on for about 3 years. They saw me as a daydreamer. They saw me as somebody who was, just different, and they don't like people who are different. So they had another student start writing down all my homework assignments and publicly, calling me a jerk in class, and those were the literal words. And it was very messed up. And I was keeping it all to myself because I was getting in trouble all day at school. Last thing I wanted to do was get in trouble at home. Right. Not that my parents would have gotten mad at me about that, but I didn't know that. I was, so the child psychologist kind of pulled all that out of me and told my parents. My parents got really steaming mad at because my mom was one of the most prolific members of the parents group, and she was helping out with all the big events and making costumes for the Christmas play, the pageant, and all that kind of stuff. I mean, she was very involved, and yet the sidelines for 3 years, her son's teachers are literally just beating him up all the time. So I went to this other school, and the psychologist had recommended it as a break. In other words, what he was saying was he's just come out of this 5 years of hell, and he's really smart. That's their words, not mine. He's really smart, and he needs a break. And so I wanted him to go to this school. So, and I'm about to get to England, I promise you. I have to set you up for this because this is...
No, again, ask then answer. Like, this is what I signed up for this.
So, he said it was going to be a break because academically it wasn't as intense and I could just kick back a little bit and just kind of decompress. Unfortunately, what wasn't made clear to me, or my parents, I guess, and I don't think the psychologist meant anything by this. I think he thought this was the right move. This was actually a school for children with behavioral disorders and learning disabilities, like acute learning disabilities. So whoops. I ended up like the academic version of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And I was this kid coming out of a convent school, and I literally had, a kid in the corner that would just sit there and do this all the time. And then I had another kid who, if you tapped him on the head, he would do this. And then I had other kids that were, had anger management problems, and they would get in fights and stuff. And then there was another kid that jumped up on his desk, like, Robin Williams style, and pointed down at the Jewish girl in our class and said, "Hitler should have killed all you," like at the top of his lungs and all kinds of stuff. And I'm sitting there going, I don't know what's worse. Like, should I have stuck it out with the nuns or
right?
Like, this is crazy. And I'm looking at this kid, Richard, and I'm thinking, I didn't realize a 12-year-old could be a Nazi. Like, I had no idea.
Core to the stream.
So, I was really just... So when my mom and dad came to us one weekend at home and said, "Hey, Michael," and Jonathan, that was my brother's name, "Dad's got an opportunity to go to move us all to London. Do you know what London is?" And I went, "Yeah, I've seen Bon Voyage, Charlie Brown. Like, I know what London is." And of course I'd seen Sherlock Holmes and stuff, but that was obviously not the same thing. And she said, "Well, this would involve us moving out of the country and away from everybody and away from everything." And I just kind of looked at my mom and I was like, "Yeah, that's fine." Because in my mind,
yeah, I'm good.
I'm not leaving anything behind. Like, of course, we had to leave our dog with my grandparents, and we had to, say goodbye to our aunts and uncles, whatever. But, as far as like friends and all that stuff, there was nothing there that was keeping me. Now, my brother's transition was harder. Jonathan had a harder time, but what we found out, side note, is that Jonathan just had a hard time any time we moved. So when we left and moved to England, he had a hard time not being in Tennessee. When we came back and we moved to Atlanta, he had a hard time not being in England anymore. It was like this whole pattern. So we moved to England, and I don't want to say... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, yeah, and I hate to interrupt the flow of the story, but I wanted to show chat has some solidarity for you. Somebody says, "I heard the nuns at Tom Baker's school would tell him that he was nothing. I felt sorry for him. He had it a bit worse than Michael, but not going to that since England is a bit weird." I don't agree with that last statement, personally, but I get where you're coming from. And Sal says, "In first grade, he couldn't spell or write as fast as the other kids and was still doing an assignment. Teacher stood in front of me in class, proceeded to literally call me stupid and an idiot." Mm-hmm. Well, I can say from direct experience that teacher didn't know what they were talking about whatsoever. You were a very, very bright, if cynical man, and I appreciate you for who you are.
Well, I appreciate that. And that's the thing. Like, I wasn't complaining to my parents about that convent school. They the way they figured it out. This is the part of the story I can't believe I left out. I only learned this 2 years ago.
Oh,
my mom finally told me this because she never wanted to talk about this stuff. She always felt horrible, about it. And finally, I'm like, "Mom, I'm in my 40s. We need to talk about this. Let's."
Right.
And she told me that the way they found out that what was going on was that my classmates were going home in the afternoon, and it finally got so bad with me. They were telling their parents about how mean the teachers were to this one boy. And so then the parents called my parents, and that's how it all came out. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. They were like, they really beat him up. Like well, I don't know. They were, and this is over a period of days or weeks or months where it's like, yeah. And then the teachers were mean to Michael again. And then finally the parents would, I guess, start asking him, well, how'd the teachers treat that Michael boy today? Real badly. Like very, very badly. Like it, and it just became this thing where finally it just all spilled out. So, yeah. So I end up, in England. And one of the things that became immediately apparent to me was, it's hard to explain, but I was not a sports kid. So while I liked the idea of certain sports, I was just not interested in sports. I didn't hate them as long as I wasn't dragged into them, but it wasn't my idea of a good time. So when I got over to England, suddenly I found a society where, for kids anyway in school, sports and theater were both equally respected and equally given adequate attention. Now, that was my experience. I'm sure there's some British people who might say, well, my school really over-indexes on football and doesn't give a crap about the theater. I don't know.
Sure.
That was my experience in the early 90s. The other thing that I learned was that history that interested me was on my doorstep all the time. Like, in other words, it was no longer, if I want to see a castle, I have to look in a book. We can go see different castles every weekend. World War II was now right on my doorstep. See, I grew up watching The Great Escape and watching Longest Day and all that kind of stuff. And so like one trip during like fall break or whatever, my dad took us all over the channel to Normandy, and I got to see where, the Longest Day's real events happened, and all that kind of stuff. So that was huge. And then just the uniqueness of the things you could do. Like, we're going to rent a canal boat and we're going to go down the locks of the little rivers and stuff in southern England. Excuse me. I mean, these are not things like, when you're a kid that loves Indiana Jones and you get to walk around in a ruined castle that still got battlements and stuff, and it's 1,000 years old, and it's a lot more interesting than when, and again, I mean, no disrespect to anything I'm about to say. I'm simply talking about from a kid's perspective at the age of like 9 or 10 prior. When your mom tells you at the age of 8 or 9, we're going to go to a tomb, and you're an Indiana Jones kid, and you go, oh, cool. And then you drive all this way out there to some place in, Western Tennessee or Northern Mississippi or whatever it is.
Right.
And it's this big field with a big grassy hill. And you go, what is this? And they go, this is a Native American tomb. And I'm like, it's a big grassy hill. It doesn't have any big rocks or statues or stones or, like it does. As a child, there's like this disconnect. So in England,
there's an expectation,
yes.
and that expectation was not met, and you're like, "This is lame."
Yeah,
like when I was around that age, I was living, because we moved about every 4 years was the cycle for a while, and I still have what I call the 7-year itch. I'm trying to get out of it, but we lived in the Norfolk, Virginia beach area of Virginia. And we were hop, skip, and a jump. Dad was stationed at the Coast Guard base in Yorktown. And the road to his base, because there's only one in or out because it's right on the coast, they had these old forts that were used in the Civil War, and presumably some of which was used in the Revolutionary War. And they were somewhat intact.
Right.
And there were some cannons there. There were some broken this and that, a few, placards and stuff. And the first time you hear, we're going to go to Fort such and such, I forget the name of the damn thing. I'm horrible about these things. But we went out there, and it was fun for about a half hour to just hop around and have this different place to explore. But then the reality sets in, is like, well, There's not going to be any sweeping troops of cavalry over the hill. This cannon's not going to fire.
Right.
There will never be a war fought here by purpose. Again, it's just a hill that was dug out with some wood on it.
Right.
It's cool for 5 minutes.
Yes.
And then it's like, well, that's not. I came here. I came here for an argument. I came here for a fort. You know, this is not quite a fort. It's an entrenched or an embanked position that you held.
Yes.
It wasn't really a fort.
Right.
You know, so when you go to a tomb and it's just, we put a bunch of bodies here and we put dirt on it.
Yeah.
And we didn't mark it because that's not our philosophy of life, which is what it is. But it makes for a real lame historical document. Man.
Yeah. And then you're out in this really hot field on a summer day, and you know, all you want now is like a Coke from they're not going to buy you that because they're going to take us somewhere for lunch or something later, or maybe go all the way home. And it's a whole thing. And I don't mean to sound like a spoiled brat. I'm simply saying that the stark difference from that kind of interest, how that interest is met in England versus how it's met here, is massive.
Right.
Like, and again, like, there, you know, my parents had to dial in with me a little bit when we got there, because I remember their terminology was off. Because remember, these were 50s babies that had grown up, you know, in the 50s and 60s, and they had really, until my dad got that assignment, they'd never really left the country. So I'll never forget, like, within the first few weeks of living there, my mom said, well, we're going on a big trip today. We're leaving the house. We're going on this day trip. And I was like, oh, where are we going? She said, we're going to see a castle. And I went, oh, really? You know, because I was 12 and I was like, yes, finally a castle, you know. And where'd we go? Well, we went to Hampton Court Palace, which was Henry VIII's retreat home, his manor house. It's a big sprawling edifice of, you know, monarchy, you know, elitism or whatever, but it's not a early Middle Ages, you know, Lego style castle, like Lego Castle. It was made of brick, you know, and I immediately, the moment we saw it, I looked over at my brother who's younger than me, and I went, I think we've been had, you know, but it was only because my parents, to them, castle is something, a place a king lived. And I'm like,
and that,
and I'm going, Mom, I'm not interested in that period of time where people in the Renaissance wore, you know, tights up to their pantaloons and buckles on their shoes, and, you know, walked around in big floofy outfits, and, you know, this was a brick place, and every room was a big empty rectangle with tapestries on the walls, hardwood floors, and dainty furniture, just sort of, and I would walk around going, I mean, it was room after room after room. And I was like, so all that to say that it took my parents a good bit to dial in so that we could, you know, we finally started to figure it out a little bit, you know, like it was, you know, not that it was all about me, but I also learned, you know, there's a lot more history out there. The other thing that I loved about England was the fact that, like I said, World War II was everywhere. And so when I went to an air museum, which those were all over the place, they actually had cool stuff in them. So like you'd go to an air museum and it was like, wow, like they have all the real stuff here, like going all the way back to World War I. You go to there is a place in the center of London called the Imperial War Museum. And you go there and it's not just a clever name. I mean, it's like, yeah, it is their long-standing military history museum that's been there for, you know, since Queen Victoria or earlier or something like that. Like it is, and you know, they keep it up to date, and they, you know, put a lot of money into it, and they love their history, you know. So so we lived there for about 3.5 years, and in that time, I have a great time at school. Best three academic years of my entire education. And then I get to do an Eagle Scout project at Bassingbourn Airfield, where the Memphis Belle flew out of in 1942-43.
Right.
And I get to, and I restore the radio room there for the 50th anniversary of the Memphis Belle's 25th mission. The pilot shows up, cuts the ribbon. He flies from North Carolina. He gives me my Eagle Scout medal that night. So I'm riding this big high because I'm like, man, the coolest stuff happens here, right? So now we're finally at the end of this long answer where now it's time to go back to the United States.
Right.
And I didn't want to leave. My mom didn't want to leave. My brother didn't want to leave. But my dad said his job was making him, although now that's a little suspect. We're not sure. I think dad is still very much an Opie Taylor kind of guy, and he wanted to go back to America. Like that was like, I don't think dad adjusted very well. Looking back as an adult, I'm not saying that he couldn't survive. He was fine. He had a job and everything like that. But I think where his heart was, home is where the heart is. Well, his home was back in the southeastern United States, and he decided he was in charge. So anyway, we pack up our stuff and we go back, and this last thing that I discovered after we moved back. This is the last big thing that I discovered, but it took moving back to discover it. When we moved there in the summer of '90, Dick Tracy was the big summer movie coming out that year.
Right.
And Madonna's Vogue was one of the number one songs on the radio.
Mm-hmm.
When we moved to England I just moved that photo. When we moved to England a week, 6 weeks later, whatever it was, we get to England. Yeah, people drive on the other side of the car and they drive on the other side of the road. But the big movie later that summer was Dick Tracy. The big hit on the radio was Vogue from Madonna. So pop culturally speaking, things kind of had a uniformity. I mean, like, sure, every now and then on the posters in the tube stops, you would see a poster for an American movie that was coming out, and then you'd see occasionally a poster for a movie that you could tell was a British film that maybe, would never get shown in America. But so there was a little bit of a culture shift there, a little, but not much, because all the American movies still came out over there.
Right.
The majority of them did. They were just like a few months later, right? So it created this illusion that there was uniformity in pop culture across the English-speaking world. And because I had seen British actors on TV in America and in films, it only reinforced that idea. Right? We're all working together in my, it's all the same industry, right? So I'm listening to all the music over there. And it's the age when you're 12 to almost 15 years old. So that's the music that really imprints on you at that age. Whatever you're listening to at that age is what imprints on you, right? So there I am listening to all this stuff that had followed me over from the US. So like, 1990 summer, US, what was it? It was CNC Music Factory, Technotronic, it was Soul to Soul, it was, all those different bands were cropping up right there at the end of the 80s. Roxette, all that stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they were all big over there. And over there, I'm listening to that, plus I'm listening to the KLF, and I'm listening to Kylie Minogue, and they're on MTV, and I'm seeing their videos, and they're charting, their singles are charting. And I'm like, yeah, whatever, it's another day in, Western civilization, great. We get back to the United States and we're learning the lay of the land in North Atlanta. And we decide to go to a mall one day to learn where our local mall is. Because back then malls actually still operated and hadn't failed. They were a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And, I finally had some allowance money because I'd given up the wish to buy model kits, because I was like, well, that ain't happening because of Jurassic Park. Thanks a lot, dinosaurs. So I said, hey, I'm gonna go to the record store over here, and because I'd finally like to have Kylie Minogue albums on CD. Because see, I was buying cassettes because I had a cassette player.
Right.
Well, now I finally had.
Same.
Now I finally had access to. I had a CD stereo thing, like a little in my room, like clock stereo. So I was going to but upgrade. I was going to go buy upgrades. And I walked in there and I said, hey, went through the pop section. I looked at through M, and then I looked through K, and I'm like, so I go over and I'm like, hey, can you tell me, like, are you just sold out of Kylie Minogue albums? And the guy was like,
who?
He's like, can you spell that? And I'm like, Minogue. And he goes, she's not in our system. And I'm like, yeah, we don't have any listings for her in the computer. And I'm just like, okay. That was the moment where I realized, oh. And that was when I looked around, and it was like that Kaiser Soze moment where you see the Nirvana posters and the Foo Fighter posters, and well, I guess Foo Fighters was a few years away, but Nirvana, right. Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, all that kind of stuff. And I was aware of those bands right at the end, but they never really took hold over there like they did here. Like, they didn't redefine music. And so I was like, oh, music changed here while I was away. And it's totally different. And that's when I started to realize that America walks to the beat of its own drum, which in some ways is great, but in other ways, what I learned is America loves walking to the beat of its own drum so much that sometimes it's willfully disregarding everything else that's going on in the world culturally.
Yep.
And so it's like, oh, so that really gave me like this eye-opening vantage point. Yeah. So
I kind of went through that, not in reverse, but just kind of like by nature of my musical journey as well, because, by the mid 80s, I had been latched on to Metallica, and someone slipped me like a half-ass dub of the early Napalm Death stuff, and metal. The thing is, I always loved metal, and I kept going more extreme. I always loved pop, kept listening to pop. It never really went anywhere because pop is pop.
Right.
And then, of course, the early hip-hop stuff, right through like 93, 94 is where I kind of stopped with hip-hop. But I was listening to all these things in a very disparate manner. But the longer I went on, and I saw more innovation on the heavier side of metal, I kept going into that more.
Right.
But because so much of that was happening in Scandinavia and the UK and other parts of Europe, it became increasingly difficult to track down these things, not necessarily because they didn't have distribution in America, but because that distribution was so small that you had to work overtime to get a copy. I remember flying to Colorado for a marching band event when I was a junior in high school and flipping out when we went to the mall and I could find a copy of a Morbid Angel record that I could never find in Pennsylvania.
Right. Yeah.
And that was when I realized, oh, every store is different. They have different distribution orders and things like that. So I go to this cat at a Camelot before their FYE. This is back when Camelot was Camelot, right?
Right.
And I was like, all right, I know there's Napalm Death CDs you're not showing me. I want them all. Order all of them from the warehouse. I want them here. I want them now. And this guy's like this little mousy 5'2", like, oh, okay, sure. and he would go through and he would order everything up, and he kind of became like my go-to. Like every time I walk in there, if he was working, he'd be like, "Hey Jim, I was looking at the catalogs for this record," because he knew all the labels that I was ordering, and he's like these are coming out. And he would always ask, like, do I order just one for you, or there are other people that are looking for this? So it started to kind of form this whole thing where you have to carve out your corner of the world if you're not doing the American thing, and it's really odd. And as an American, when you get into British television, whether it be through PBS or just a random rental at a video store, if someone happens to have it, you do any research on the subject, looking at either Red Dwarf or The Young Ones, or Are You Being Served, Faulty Towers, Monty Python, you start to see. If you start reading the credits or you look at the way things are working in terms of distribution, you start to realize that the way television networks are organized in the UK is extremely different from the way they're organized here in the States. It's more of it feels like it's more of a public thing, although still very privatized and corporate all on its own. But the way that they would authorize series, like when they greenlit a TV show, it feels like for the most part, it wasn't nearly as precarious a situation as it is here in the States, where if you're not pulling the numbers by halfway through a season, whether your story's done or not, it's getting pulled. And it just, these kinds of things all kind of influenced like this almost rebellious, like, well, I'm going to listen to and watch whatever I want to watch. Distribution be damned. And, we didn't have the internet yet. And over time you learn all this stuff. And um, having actually been over there and coming back, having that experience, did you find it was a recurring thing where, whether it was the American way or the approach of certain things, do you still get disillusioned from time to time the way things are here versus the way they were in Britain, without taking a poof on America or anything? But
no, I'm totally open to answer that. It's more that I always keep a back door open for perspective. In other words, there's no absolute. So when I hear a lot of people, talking about an issue over the last 20 years that's happened, one of the various issues that's happened, time marches forward and, things keep happening day by day. You start to realize we were there during Desert Storm. So we got to see the British BBC coverage of the Desert Storm operation. And that was very different from when we would go home for the summer and we would see the coverage of some of it from the American point of view. Now, that's not to say that the Americans did anything wrong in their coverage, nor did the British necessarily, but they both had very different points of view in their news coverage about it and what they prioritized and how they described it. So when I hear people say things like, they're very dismissive of what, Europe is trying to do, or, as a collective, or what Britain's attitude is towards a multinational decision or whatever, I'm not as dismissive. That's where it's led me. It's like, well, especially with my World War II knowledge, I freely admit it's like, we really need to hear out our friends, and not to get political on that, but also just when I came back, I never did quite find myself in step with everybody else. And I think it's because, and again, that 1990 to 93 period was a very transformative 4 years for this country culturally as well. I mean, the music scene completely changed. And again, cultures change based on big entertainment movements in general. So not only did the music scene completely change and go counterculture, go grunge, go anti-establishment for cultural reasons, but also, you had the advent of all of these Jurassic Park level technologies that were making entertainment a juggernaut beyond what we even dreamed of with Star Wars and everything else. And that's big business over here. And then Desert Storm happened at that time. So we, America's place on the world stage was both at its most positive and also at its most prominent. So you had this kind of, there was a joke from snobby Americans when we lived in England that if you want to know what the times differences between America and England, dial your watch back 20 years, which I thought that was really snobby. There are things about both countries that are kind of backward, so for example, we're still using the King's measurements and they're now on the metric system. That's kind of backwards on our end, but on their end, we had a dentist who just didn't even put gloves on and stuck his fingers inside my brother's mouth. So and that was, 1992, whatever it was. It's just humans. Humans just are different individual to individual. But I don't mean to bore you with the extension of this answer, but
you're not boring me, Michael.
Okay.
You're not.
What I took away from it was that I was out of step. I was not able to relate to the American kids at my school very well, and they weren't really able to relate to me all that well. I ended up with friends. I wasn't hated or anything. I was able to survive or whatever. But I'll tell you something interesting. And you should never say that before you say something, because it's for the other person to judge if it's interesting. So sorry about that. There was one person when I started high school that really took a shine to me. She really, she was the one person that didn't think I was odd or whatever. And her name was Alana. She was in the grade lower than me. I went in as a freshman and she was an 8th grader. So she was one grade below me. And she was, really like, she liked me genuinely as a person. Like, even after I made it clear that I wasn't looking to date anybody, she never like abandoned me as a friend at that point. She just really, she stayed my friend, even though I was frustrated and out of step socially for 4 years. I was probably a hard person to get along with at times because of that. Like, trying to find my place. But irony of ironies, she is now a British citizen and has been for 20 years. And she lives over there now, even though she was a born American. And I look at that and I go, well, she clearly saw something intrinsic. So then I go to in me that resonated with her, that would have resonated with me in reverse. If I'd met some. So I go to college at Syracuse University, and I'm in film school. And, you're meeting people in your dorm room freshman year. They all have different majors, they're all whatever. And this guy, Joe, I hadn't really, I'd just been like, hi, I'm Michael. I'm from Atlanta, because at that point it's 4 years later. I wasn't trading on, I used to live in another country. Like, that's not really,
Right.
It's not like saying my dad has a Lamborghini. My dad doesn't. What I'm saying is, it's like, it would be like saying that, it'd be like, oh, my dad.
Right.
Joe was hanging out with us one night, freshman year, and somebody told a joke or said something that was sort of like they were joshing me a little bit, not in any mean way, but just in kind of an uncomfortable, kind of like trying to make me uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And they were making me, like, we were all friends, but they were kind of making me uncomfortable. And Joe looked over at me and he goes, Michael, you remind me of like every single character in Monty Python's Flying Circus. And I went, and I hadn't told him anything about myself. And I was like, what? And he goes, you're very proper, and you're very, and I was like, he's like, you get so nervous, or not nervous, or not uptight. He wasn't being negative. I don't remember what word he used, but he was basically saying, you're, a worrier or whatever. I don't remember. And I thought that was really odd because I was like, huh. So then the last one comes up. This was recently. All right.
Okay.
Yeah. This last one, I'm going to shut up and we move on to another question. So when Melinda and I met, we met in 2009. Mm-hmm. We used to josh each other about ways we would pronounce specific words or words with different. So for example, obviously I do not have a British accent. All right. That's not where I'm going with this. I did have a Southern accent. Didn't think I did because my relatives didn't think I did, but I've reviewed tapes from Nashville. My Southern accent was just not as extreme as their rural Tennessee Southern accent. So they called that no accent, but I had one. Right. I got the footage to prove it. I had one. But I guess 3.5 years in England, it started to stamp it down. And I was picking up other things, but I wasn't there long enough for it to flip over. It was like, I went over there sort of with sort of slight sort of thing. And then it sort of stamped out, but it didn't go over. It didn't sort of flip,
You've got your non-regional diction down to a T.
Right. Very, very Christina Applegate Anchorman non-regional diction.
Yes.
Yes. So I used to josh her because sometimes when she says the word and, she leaves off the D. She'll just say and, which is my mom's name. So I'm like, but she would josh me because when I say words that end in ing, which I'd never even picked up on before, she picked up on it. Apparently, when I say words like thinking, it comes up with a K at the end.
Right.
And she's always, kind of joshing me about that. Well, the other night, this was literally like 5 nights ago. We're watching one of Analog Toys videos about, it was like a Patreon message or something. I can't remember what it was. And Tony's talking and he just happens to be dropping a bunch of ing words. And they're coming out with the K at the end. And I just kind of looked over at Melinda and I was like, are you? And she goes, yeah, dear. She's like, I've been aware of this for a long time. And I'm like, well, I was aware because you made fun of it. I wasn't aware that you'd made a connection. How long have you known this? She's like, oh, for a while. She's like, it all makes sense. So clearly there are these little echoes that follow me through, that you are the sum of everywhere you've ever been.
It's true. Like,
Yeah.
and I've said this before, where I certainly linguistically have had a certain similar thing where I was born in Boston. My parents were originally from the Pittsburgh area. Graduated high school around that area, but then I lived in Georgia. I lived in Augusta while I was in the Marine Corps. Then went to Chicago, and in Chicago and the Marine Corps. What's weird is that sometimes, like, there's certain military orders in the United States Marine Corps that you get that will just come out very hard in Chicago, even though that person's not from Chicago.
Right.
Like if someone's just faffing off and doing something stupid, like, oh yeah, keep doing that too, and it's the TOH instead of the TOO.
Right.
And then certain things like, oh, be the one, yeah, keep messing around too, like that whole thing. There's certain phrases that you just pick up. And then I moved to Chicago, and someone hears me say that, they go, oh, you're from here. I'm like, no, I'm not. I just wore fatigues for 4 or 5 years. It's totally different. And then I moved to Iowa, where they don't really have an accent, but they thought I had one. Maybe I did. Now I'm in Texas, where it's all over the place.
Right.
Texas is way more multicultural than you would think. There's tons of stuff down here, but yet if I go into like a dive bar that's owned by people over the age of 40, they immediately like Yankee. Like they can tell right away, like total Yankee and stuff. And my girlfriend Sue, she's originally from Texas. She moved here back from Oregon, but she's from Texas, and every so often she'd be like, "You fucking Yankee," So it's kind of like
when I got back from England and I was around people here in Atlanta, they thought they couldn't pin me down. They were like, "Are you from California?" And then when I moved to Syracuse, they're like, "Where are you from?" And I'm like, I live in Atlanta." They're like, "But you're not from Atlanta. Where are you from?" I mean, people cannot figure out. And Melinda will say things like, she's like, certain words, and I'm aware certain words because I've lived in Atlanta most of the time I've been back here. I did a stint out in California. I did a stint in Syracuse, but most of the time I've been in Atlanta. So there are still, because of my Tennessee background, there are still words here and there that are Southern slant. And then apparently, according to Melinda's own discoveries, there are words that are British slant, which I wasn't aware of. So, yeah.
And I did pick up on a lot of it, because you may recall the story. I was doing research for a video, and they just mentioned your name in passing. After I finished shooting the video, I went and watched, and then I just binge watched pretty much everything you'd done because I wasn't watching anything else. I just wanted to focus on that. And I did notice a pattern where some stuff is decidedly British leaning and some stuff is decidedly, Southeast. But what I find is that it's not necessarily an accent thing; it's a pronunciation. Choice.
It's pronunciation. It's not an accent thing. Like I would never be so. It's all unconscious, is what it is.
Right.
And I keep working very carefully, not to bring it back to the video production thing, but I consciously work on, just like you do, my my on screen or my on audio voice, because so many people, I've tried to bring my A game on that from the very beginning, but we all improve. So I can't even listen to my older videos at this point. It's like, wow, I thought that was good at narration. So I've really been working on my enunciation and my inflection and everything else. I make sure that I try and pronounce those ands with the D at the end. And one of the words that's hard for me, I still can't figure out, is interesting. I can say it right now.
Interesting.
But in the flow of a sentence, I'll say interesting, interest, rather than interest. And I know that, it's probably not a mispronunciation to say interesting, but it is a variation on it, because you're leaving out certain consonants. And so, but sometimes I throw up my hands because in the middle of a sentence when I'm reading it, I can't get it right. And so I default back to the only way I'm getting through this sentence is if I say interesting rather than interesting, and then yeah.
And I deal with some of the same stuff. And a lot of it comes down to a point where, like, even right now, I am physically focused on slowing my voice down Because if I don't, I'm going to speak a lot faster like this and go through this.
Right.
And some people can dig that, some can't. And my day job is I do corporate training. I'm in the education software industry, and what we do, we have our software, and then our clients on board through folks like myself. And no, I don't dress like this. Unfortunately, it would be great to have them go, oh, he's wearing a satanic shirt. Oh my god, But I find that when I get excited, I almost go Welsh because I just start speaking faster and faster and faster and faster.
Right.
And it's the idea is to get through the material because I know it's recorded. And I even joke with them when I say, look, I realize I'm speaking very quickly. It's because I want to make sure we get through all of this stuff. But I want you to know that you can watch the YouTube video later and put it on like a 0.75 or 0.5 so you can actually understand what I'm saying.
Right.
But when I'm creating content, that's going to be edited and post, things like that. And because I don't really work off of a script, I find it easier to compile my thoughts if I slow down my voice to a certain, pacing, a certain kind of a rhythm. Because as a drummer, I also think in terms of time signatures and beats per minute and stuff like that. Do you find that, other than changing the timbre of your voice or the pronunciation, do you find that there's a rhythmic kind of a sensibility that you have to find?
Yes.
Because I know that like newscasters do that, and certainly for dialogue, it's a different way. When you're doing acting, for example, it's a very different approach because your voice, for example, inflects very differently when you're acting the role, when you're playing yourself in those Broken Vader videos as opposed to on camera, hey, Star Wars, Hasbro sucks, or whatever you're saying in that moment.
I give myself some liberties with those because that's a person in an interpersonal moment with someone else. And they're not trying to impart information necessarily. It just sounds more natural for that to happen. Like, I'm not going to worry about, there was a guy one time that gave me crap because he said, how there's a lot of randos on the internet that just get fixated on weird stuff. And he was,
you don't say,
right. He was very critical of me out of nowhere because my Tennessee accent, I assume is my Tennessee accent. I don't know, but I tend not to say the second D and didn't. I just say didn't, not didn't. And he got real whatever with me about that. Now, while I think what he did was, kind of a jerkwad thing to do, it did alert me to the fact that that was a word that I needed to work on a little bit for that non-regional thing. However, if I'm doing a scene between people and I'm just talking like this, and it's me trying to do as part of a script or something where, say, I look at you as part of this script and I'm like, I didn't do that. I'm just going to let myself say that. I'm not going to be like, I didn't do that. I don't, because once I start that, because it's not natural to me, I start to feel telegraphed, like, forsooth and what no, like it doesn't sound normal,
Exactly.
So, yeah.
And it's kind of nuts. I'm going to go into something on that, but I have to bring this part of the chat up before I go too far away. But Tony says he's listening to your fascinating stories and learning about grand wankers in the chat. I saw the comments and I'm like, I don't know where that's going, but I want you to know, Chad, I saw it. But
this is a Tom Baker interview that Tim Hayes has watched, where Tom Baker talks about his convent school or monastery school days or something like that. And Tom Baker, as you know, is a very colorful character. He loves to tell jokes. So there's no telling what he really meant by that. But I would advise anybody listening to a Tom Baker interview to love it, enjoy it, and laugh at it, but don't take it as word and gospel. He likes to make the fish bigger a little bit, and for fun, for everybody's fun, but don't take it literally. Like,
and I think there's a lot of folks that do that. I know Craig Charles does that quite a bit because I've watched every interview he's done that I have access to because I'm a huge Red Dwarf fan, and you can tell that each time a new version of the DVDs come out and there's new interviews, like the story gets a little better every time he tells it, or he'll leave things out and stuff like that.
Yeah,
it's true of anything. And I remember finding out that the association that Craig had with English bands like Napalm Death and Carcass, where Napalm Death in England was gigantic. They were played on the radio because of John Peel, and as as a side note, the Peel sessions that Napalm did back in 88 and 90, and then they did one in like 94, I want to say 95. But those are among the best recordings they've ever done.
Right.
And I don't know who was in the booth at BBC One. I don't know who thought this was a good idea, but on their first one, this is the only thing I could figure out from a sound engineering standpoint. But it feels like they mixed everything perfectly and then turned reverb to 10 on every single thing, because it becomes this cacophony, which is what you want out of a Napalm Death recording, to be honest. But it was just like, what? It was insane stuff. But I'm digressing horribly. But to reel it back in, one of the members of Napalm were also in Carcass, and at some point they had an episode where they needed a drummer and a bass player, or a bassist, or a drummer and guitar player for a scene in Red Dwarf. And the guitar player from Napalm Death is doing like this really hack impression of their drummer, making fun of him for the entire scene. And they're doing, and the bass player from Carcass was doing guitar. It was just bizarre. But when I figured this out, and you can't unsee it, and you're like, whoa, like the culture was so different even then at that time. And there's certain things that they're going to gravitate to that we would, because you would never have seen, like, well, I guess that's not true. We had Cannibal Corpse and Ace Ventura. So there goes that point. It's completely out the window by now. But to come back to the thing where we're doing inflection and how you speak in certain places, I had to do as far as I know, this is the last thing I had to do for the film. He said, I got 2 more lines of ADR for you. I'm like, okay. And he says, all right, you need to scream like you're falling. I'm like, okay. I need at least 5 to 6 seconds of it. I'm like, all right, that's easy. I can scream. And then I need you to scream just real quick, like you're screaming like a girl. I'm like, you've heard my voice, right? It's not going to be easy. He goes, well, you got to figure it out. I had to go back and watch B-roll that I had compiled while we were doing some other stuff, because every time we would go to do a reshoot, I'm like, dude, I have to see where I'm at, because I'm not doing the character like this. I'm more up here when I'm doing that character, because he's kind of a nerd. But I didn't quite go up here because that would have been way too over the top. So it's somewhere between here and here. And you had to figure it out. And then you're like, okay, where was it? It's stupid, pretentious actor shit. Okay.
Yes.
But I didn't want to scream as me. I wanted to scream as him. So I didn't come out, or whatever. And it was, and again, I did this an hour before we started. And it was like this 15 minutes of like, okay, all right. And you feel really stupid. Then recreating this space and doing all these things. So, but yet when on a video, or when I'm producing something, or trying to make sure my inflection is fine, I don't feel strange doing that.
Yeah.
I don't understand what that is. I don't know if it's something where when you're kind of entrenched in a project, for whatever reason, whether you're acting or you're shooting or you're editing, and you're doing things and you can maintain a certain kind of tone, if it just makes it easier to slip into it because of that, and then when you go, 2 years outside of that and you try to bring that back, if that's the hard thing.
Right.
And the reason I bring this up is you have a tendency to, here, I've got the slate of stuff that I want to do sometime. And you'll start this thing here, and then you'll go over here, and then work on some of this, come back over here, edit that. Do you ever run into a situation where it's difficult to flip that switch to get back into the mode of that project from something else? What's your process for that? Because I can't. I'm very much a shoot it, edit it, put it out before I forget. I don't have multiple projects that are in different states of production at this state. I never really have. I've been doing YouTube for a long time, and I've always just kind of went, do it, get it out. How does that process work for you?
It is chaotic a little bit. I will say to Tony at Analog, real quick, is that yes, the word figure, there are 2 pronunciations in my mind. There's Tom Hanks from Toy Story, where he says, "You're an action figure." And then there's the British pronunciation, which is figure. So my struggle is because there are some regions of Britain where they say schedule, and there are other regions of Britain where they do the American type and they say schedule. So all bets are off for me anymore. What is the proper pronunciation of a word? I will always defer to the British pronunciation if I know it and I know it for certain. But with that word in particular, I'm not sure what it is anymore. So I've said to myself, is Figga part of the British accent that's sort of like me saying didn't rather than didn't? Or is it that's the pronunciation? So yeah, I struggle with that, but only in my mind. And so far I stay with the figure, because it's Gure.
I do. It does feel to me that that's an affectation. I feel that feels like it is an accent thing.
Yeah.
I think there's some stuff where like aluminium versus aluminum kind of a thing.
Yeah.
That is very different.
Yes. Yes.
It's straight up pronunciation, because I think that if you were to have like a ray, or you could shoot somebody like Tony, and I don't want to shoot Tony, but if I could shoot him with a ray, take away his British accent, and any other influences, just make it just a straight non-regional diction, I think he would say figure. I think that would happen, but that's granted a gross assumption based upon context.
Right. Yeah.
But I get why that becomes a thing where you're just like, what? You have to think about it.
That's why I don't get onto people for pronunciation, because pronunciation is oftentimes determined by accent. So people who get all bent out of shape saying you pronounce it this way, you pronounce it that way, it's like, you do because your voice does this, this, and this. This person's voice in our native language does this, this, and that. So why don't you just be happy that you know what they're saying, and let's move on with our lives? Like, but anyway, so the whole thing about my production workflow is I will get really invested in an idea, and I'll start pursuing it, and I'll just go and go and go and go. And I might even write the script, might even get, start collecting the materials. And then somewhere in the background, as I'm working the other elements of it, like collecting things to show on camera, collecting, here's a non-toy thing we can talk about that flows right into this. My Robin Hood documentary.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Okay. It's all about the film and television adaptations of Robin Hood. So I've gone back through 100+ years of Robin Hood in film and TV to try and pull all this together. And I start production designing what I want the video to feel like and look like. Well, part of it was this opening shot idea that I have, where we're going to go to the North Georgia mountains on location in the spring. We're going to, on a sunny day, and we're going to be, I'm going to do the on-camera hosting thing, walking through the forests, talking about, the history of this character. And I want it to pan over, and I want there to be this big oak tree or something that we'll find on the land. And I want it to have the medieval longbow with the medieval arrows and the arming sword and the famous hat, but not a cheesy hat. I wanted Errol Flynn's. I want a quality one, right? Which I had to have made custom. Now, everything else has showed up. The handmade longbow from the guy that makes them for Ridley Scott, the arrows, all of it's here. But that hat which the hat's not even from the UK. The hat's being made by a hatter here in the US, but it's still in development. They've just finished the prototype, and now we're still a few months away. So we had to go into Iconicon right as I was getting that really underway. And I was like, well, we're going to Iconicon, and when we come out of it, that hat's still not done yet. I'm still waiting on this, and I got to keep the videos going. So I can't go full bore on something that I know there's no end game yet. So I got to go with something else. So I start developing other ideas, and maybe I'll build a thumbnail to see how it looks and how I feel about it. Because I really love looking at YouTube thumbnails. I'll go to my RetroBlasting channel page, and I'll just go to video tab, and I'll just look at the thumbnails, because that's the way I kind of want them. Good. There's variety here of both subject and color and topic and everything else. And that's how it makes me feel good about the content that I'm making. But I'll lose steam on, say, the Robin Hood project temporarily. I really want to do it, but I got nowhere I can go with it right now. Oh, sure. I could spend another 3 days writing the script, but what good is it when I know I can't film it yet? I'm going to have to wait another 6 or 7 months to do that and wait for the spring of 2022. There's no point in putting a lot of energy into that right now. I got to go find something else to do. So I'll go find another project. There's another one that I filmed footage for in England when we were there in 2019 for for a 2-week holiday. And I walked away from that. Well, I went into that trip going, yeah, it's a holiday, but I had to have videos ready before I left so that I could drop them remotely throughout the 2 weeks. So, because when you're a content creator and that is your rent, your mortgage, whatever it is, you have to make sure that you don't go dark for 2 weeks, or else the
Got to keep the lights on, quite literally.
Yeah, the algorithm will bury you. So I said, while we're in England, I will be dropping these videos remotely from the mobile app. And in the background, I'm going to go collect footage for 2 other videos. I'm going to collect footage on the video that I'd already done, which was the one talking about the Spitfire and the X-Wing fighter. I knew I wanted to do a video talking about how the Supermarine Spitfire was the historical equivalent of the X-Wing fighter in my perspective, from my point of view. So I got all that footage and I've already, used it and everything like that. And then I found out Dad had even better footage on his phone and forgot to tell me about it because do-de-do. And so I didn't have that footage, but whatever, that's a whole nother story. So the other bit of footage that I got was we took a day and drove to filming locations that were important to the history of Doctor Who for Sarah Jane Smith, for Elizabeth Sladen's character. And I got footage there, multiple shots to cut together. Some of that footage has already shown up in an earlier video that I did with, I think it was the action figure guide with Batman March, the Doctor Who action figure guide. But that footage will be repeated in this Elizabeth Sladen documentary. However, that, to your point, I started scripting it. I started working on it. I was real excited. Somebody hit me, and I started working on that back in like 2017, wow. 2018. And then somebody on Twitter contacted me saying how much they love my channel. And he ended up being this guy that used to do all of the Doctor Who DVD covers in England. Like he was the guy, and he used to be the editor for Doctor Who magazine. And he was like a huge fan of my channel, and I vetted him and he was the guy. And I was telling him what I was working on, and I was sending him script pages, and he was like, yeah, me and the writer of Sarah Jane Adventures, he's a friend of mine, we totally will collaborate with you on this. And I'm like, wow, cool, awesome, like great, that's great. So I told him, I was like, hey man, I'm going to be in England for 2 weeks. We're going to be going all over, the major part of the country. I'm sure that, because he said, well, when you're there, I really want to meet up with you. And I was like, cool, yeah, I'd love to finally meet up and hang out over a pint or whatever and just get to know one another. Well, somewhere around spring of 2019 or no, January of 2019, his correspondence got sporadic. I didn't know why. So I'm like, hey man, I haven't heard from you in a while. And he writes back. He's like, oh, sometimes I just go dark on social media. I just take a break. I'm like, okay, cool. I said, well, I'm going to be, coming to England in like 2 months. We can talk about this documentary and everything else. And he was like, yeah. Just let me know when you get closer and we'll schedule a time. So it gets to be 2 weeks out and I message him and I don't get anything back. Then I'm there that night in London and I say, hey man, I'm here. I can drop whatever I'm doing and get on the train and come to you and let's meet up. Nothing. He's never spoken to me again, but he's on Twitter all the time. So that kind of thing took the wind out of my sails for a while with the whole, because as much as I love Doctor Who and I love Sarah Jane Smith, that's an example of where I kind of got punched in the gut by unknown things, and he's so closely associated with Doctor Who that it burned me for a while, and so I was like, oh, like I hate it when people who are associated with the things I love do something like kind of shitty, and then you don't love them for a while. It's like you still love them, but you just don't want to have that thought, you don't want to be reminded,
right? Don't meet your heroes and all that kind of stuff.
And I didn't even know who the guy was. Like I'm such a Whovian novice. I only knew who the guy was when I found out he was a RetroBlasting fan and I did my homework and found out who he was. It's not like he's it's not like I met Mark Hamill and he slapped me in the face or anything like that. It's not like that, but it's still.
Well, I wouldn't put it past him. He's a weird guy.
Yeah. But I, and that's why I'm never going to meet him. But I did, that's kind of an example of where now I'm far enough out from it that I feel like I'm starting to get and yeah, that's been 2 years since he ghosted me. But hey, it's all good. I can still make it, I've still got my passion for it. So, but yeah, there's like the way my production works is it's almost like, rabbits or hamsters on a racetrack, and there's a different lane for each one, and each hamster is a different video, and they all kind of start and stop and keep going around, and they'll eventually they cross the finish line right as another one starts, and sometimes I can't predict which one is going to finish first, and I know that that's frustrating for viewers who like uniformity of schedule and everything like that, but all of my videos are hand stitched. I don't mean that in a pretentious way. What I mean is that I don't have like a standing set format where I walk over, I flick all the lights on, I stand in front of the camera, the teleprompter comes up and I say the words, and then I go into an edit and I cut some Google images in there and I'm done. Like, I have to rebuild the shooting room by hand every time we're done with a Saturday live stream. So all the equipment comes out of that room, sets up the live stream, then I have to go put it all back together. So every video is, okay, what am I doing for this video? Oh, there might be a sketch, or there might be this, or this video, I'm not even on camera. So it's this whole thing. I don't know if I answered your question, though. I feel like I'm rambling.
You did actually. And granted, I knew a lot of that from some of the recent Patreon stuff, but I want people to hear these things.
Yeah.
Because I think so often, whether it's something that's a full-on scripted production like what you do, or the off-the-cuff stuff that I tend to do that has some premeditation into it, I think a lot of people just don't stop to think about the amount of effort that it can take sometimes.
Right.
And every creator's workflow is going to be different. Every creator has a different way of expressing their spark.
Right.
And I kind of gravitated towards this style because of a few different things. I used to do a lot of scripted stuff. I did movie reviews back when that was in vogue. And it was something where I was on Blip and the whole thing where it was like, this is a nice little island where the DMCA can't really touch you. Like, they won't entertain they gave no fucks. And so you do that for a while and it gets to feel good. And then you really start focusing in on the editing, and I'd gotten it down to a science where, okay, I sit down and watch the movie, I write the script, and then I would actually pause the movie, write things, all that stuff, and really craft and make sure that I'm putting in like production notes. Okay, I want this here. I need to source this thing. Very similar to what you're doing these days.
Yeah.
In terms of just stylistically, as far as like how the script's written. I would go through all this stuff, 17 hours of editing just to get it just so, and just be like, I can't do this any better. If I tighten it too much more, it's going to fly out of my hands. Governor Tuck style, and I would do that. It would get X amount of views, but then you would see like the return would be diminishing on some level where it's like, I put 30 hours of work into this, I'm getting nothing.
Yeah.
And I start to get disillusioned. Then Blip goes under. I start trying the same thing on YouTube. I'm getting just hits all over the place. Then you have to change the way you're doing things. I'm like, well, that joke doesn't play if I don't put this part in. I can't mute the... So I stopped doing that, and I just stopped doing content for a while. A couple of years later, well, a year and a half later, actually, start getting back into gaming a little bit and start going on that kind of thing. And I said, screw it. I am just going to go full, no frills, nothing. I had a tablet. I just set it up and I talked into the camera, and it was just. And then I decided to start streaming over on Twitch, and that just kind of became a thing. And I was like, you mean to tell me I can just flip the switch, go be me, and this is somehow successful? But it wasn't scratching the editor itch. I love a good edit, even if it's just for timing purposes and to kind of like, it's really hackneyed to do, but I love a good jump cut. For whatever reason, I think jump cuts are just interesting for me. Because when you try to blend it, it looks like you're trying to hide something. But with a jump cut, it's like, well, he clearly just meant to do... I don't know.
No, I
but you
get it.
get to this, but I get stylistically to this place where it's like I get a little bit of I get to premeditate a little bit, but I still get to kind of be off the cuff, and it's like
Mhm.
this nice marriage of things, and it works. But I find myself more and more leaning into wanting to do something that has not necessarily a script, because I've caught myself. I actually wrote script outlines for a few videos recently, and I was like, "Who are you, and where did you come from?"
Right.
I'm the part of you that died when Blip died, kind of a thing. And it's insane to me that those kinds of things, elements of our creative personality, can kind of come back. I mean, even with music, I put that whole thing to rest in 2011 when I left Chicago, thinking I said never again. I'm never touching that stuff. Well, here we are, and I'm working on this record of stuff I wrote in '98 with
Uh-huh.
some guys, and I'm going to do a record, but I won't tour on it. I don't want to do a whole lot of press. I just want to get it out there for people that want to listen to it. I don't want any of the industry nonsense that comes with it. I want an independent release on a small label. I want to be as hands-on as possible without adding stress to myself, because I learned a lot
Right.
of those lessons. Um, do you ever, and I say this to say also, or I suppose ask, is there ever a point where your workflow feels formulaic in a negative way and that you want to change, but you don't, out of fear of losing something that is successful and intrinsically you, but then there's still that part of your brain that's like, oh, I could do this so much cooler, but people might not like it,
Mhm.
and I can't risk my mortgage over a creative
Yes.
spark choice.
I just talked to Melinda about this today. I called it. I said I'm on a carousel and it's already moving. It's at speed. And I said, and there's so many things where I'd love to just, put my foot down on the pavement and hop off. And I mean within the channel. I don't mean I want to quit YouTube. I mean the
Right.
carousel are the topics that have already gotten the audience going, for 9 years.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's those topics. And I want to get off this ride and go ride something else for a little while. But if I get off this ride, I might lose my place on this ride, which is already
Mm-hmm.
going. I might not be able to get back on this ride, and the audience might, not be happy about it. And so, I told Melinda today, I said, I will always love, retro stuff. I will always love retro movies and cartoons and the merchandise that goes with it. However, I also really love film and TV, and I love
Mm-hmm.
history. Like I love the history of a lot of things, including film and TV. I tried for a while to do this little series called Classics in 60 Seconds, because I was trying to give people
Mm-hmm.
the cliff notes of movies they would probably never sit down and watch that were really great films. I was trying to find a way for people to feel like they could get film literate without having to put a lot of time in, Um, and they never watched those videos and even complained that some people were like, well, that's 60 seconds of my life I'll never get back. And I'm like, it was 60 seconds. Like,
Right.
like what? And then one frustration came in. Just I did like two and they didn't really do all that well. And then I waited like 6 years and did another one and it didn't do all that well. And then that was online for like 4 years or 3 years or whatever it was. And YouTube just finally decided, even though it's 60 seconds with really fast cuts, just like boom, 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 boom. YouTube was like copyright claiming it 3 years later. And I was like, you know what?
Right.
This video doesn't even have the views to justify keeping it online. So I deleted it because I like to keep my channel claimless, so yeah, I was talking, tell Melinda today, I said, I've been spending my time relaxing lately, watching the classic TV show Colditz, which is about
Right.
Colditz Castle. It's based on the true story of the prisoners that were held in the German castle of Colditz in World War II. And really, really, really good series. And I watch it like once a year just to kick back and relax. And it's just one of those shows that I just absolutely love. And
Mm-hmm.
Melinda said, "Do you think you'll ever one day do a video about that show?" And I said, "I'd love to do a video about this television show. Heck, even about the actual history that's so cool." I said, "My doubt, though, because it'll take so long. Fire Hose of Fun, the Kathleen Kennedy video I did, that was a gamble as far as time off of doing other projects to do this one big video. And the one big video took money and time, and it was like almost a full month without me doing anything else. But when it landed, it went like gangbusters, and now it's the #1 video I've ever done on my channel. It's like 700,000 views almost or something. It's crazy. It's only been up this year. But it was tied to Star Wars, and it was tied to those movies, and it was tied to retro culture. It
was a calculated risk.
Yes. The Robin Hood thing is also a calculated risk with even less chance of success in certain ways. I think it's a slow, a late bloomer. I think that's a video that will eventually word of mouth will get around, and people will be like, "Wow, this video is really cool." And I don't think it'll be as successful as the other one, but it'll have some legs. But something like Cold It, I'm like, that would be for me, and I would spend weeks, getting this whole thing together, and then I don't think anybody will watch it. But then I say, well, Melinda would say occasionally, like, well, then you can make it a shorter video that doesn't have as much time factor in it. You don't lose as much time. I'm like, right, but I love this so much. I'd feel like I was
You don't want to shortchange it. Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, for example, I kind of abandoned YouTube for a while because the Twitch thing was such a thing. And my viewers that I did have from YouTube didn't like the streaming, especially over there. Folks that watch the streams on Twitch didn't really care for videos on there. And I was like, I got to pick I hate to pick a favorite kid. So I picked Twitch for a while, and it was successful and whatever. But then you get to a place where you're going through the motions to a certain degree. I had moved up here to Dallas-Fort Worth, and my living situation changed to where I'm at now. The internet's not great. So streaming really wasn't that much of a thing. I had experimented a year prior doing showing flea market finds and but focusing mainly on retro video games. And people started to kind of latch onto that a little bit. So I was doing a little bit of both. I was moonlighting a little bit, but with those videos, I could take as much time as I wanted to, if I needed it, or I could do this more just like, hey, there's this, let's talk about this.
Yeah.
And it was fine. But then, barely 90 days ago, I hadn't done any toy content of any kind ever.
Right.
And then I see your ass on the TV, like, well, now I got to do this, because it's your fault. Well, really, it's Matt Swafford's fault, because he gave me a good deal on Superpowers collection figures, and I haven't looked back since. Is really what it is.
Yeah. But Hughes is sitting here saying, he says, have you ever thought about having a second channel? That has been proposed to me a lot, but I find that second channels are only for people that they live stream prolifically and also do finished videos. The reason I say that is you can have a second channel and a third channel and even a fourth channel, but there's only one you to make videos. So all that time that you put into making a video for a channel, it's either going to go out on the channel you've already put all your heart and soul into with the biggest audience and kind of get panned, or it's going to go out onto another channel that doesn't have time to get grown and taken care of, and it really won't get seen by anybody. And that 2 weeks will really go up in smoke because it's my livelihood as well. Now, if I was still working, the traditional job, then yeah, I mean, it might be a consideration to just be like, it's Michael's history channel, or whatever, history and film, and all that stuff, his catch-all. But for me, it's like, even a video that kind of gets panned by the audience, in other words, not watched on RetroBlasting proper, is still going to help my end of the month stats a lot more than throwing it onto a second channel, because that'd still be weeks and weeks of work. And then when you get done, you throw it onto another channel, and RetroBlasting really gets neglected for like a full month or something. Like it would be, yeah. So
it would be something where it's very much a robbing Peter to pay Paul, but you don't even know, if Paul's going to be there when you get
Right.
there.
Right.
It's such a weird, because this is a gamble enough. Content by itself is enough of a gamble when it comes to what's going to work versus what isn't. And then when you have a storefront, if you will, where people can see your wares and that's working, but maybe you're going to try and break out product, it's still less of a risk than, say, I'm going to go rent a shop across town. I'm going to expand, do this other thing. But if it's on a road less traveled because people just don't know it exists for whatever reason,
Right.
some people are successful with it. Like, you'll have folks that do a lot of prefab videos like yourself. Maybe they'll have like a vlog channel or the live streaming where they just want to keep it separate for whatever reason. I understand that. I understand the algorithmic reasoning behind that. But it's kind of an all or nothing proposition. Either people are going to dig it or not. I mean, even Red Letter Media of all channels, who is gigantic. I have a lot of respect for their work, and they're funny. They had a separate channel for live streaming specifically, and they did it for, I think, maybe 2 years, and it just wasn't gaining enough steam for them to put the effort into it, and they stopped it. And so when a channel that big and that much of a household name on YouTube, you see that happen, it's like, well, why would I separate out my content ever? And again, why diversify to a point where you're risking that audience too much? Exactly. You know, like right now, I have a stack of NES games in a drawer right now that I've gotten over the last few months, that I have a story behind how I got each one. I want to talk about it and everything else. And even though my channel has a history of that, and there's an entrenched audience for that, even a percentage of the toy community that's come over to the channel would be interested. I don't feel like taking the risk of just saying, like, here are these games, let's talk about them, because there will be, on a long enough timeline, some jerk will come in and say, I'm here for the toys now. You're a toy channel. If you go back to my old stuff, you'll find all kinds of stuff. I have, like, political discussions, cultural philosophy discussions, psychological stuff, Destiny gameplay for frickin' days, video game reviews, retro hunts, everything. And then now, like, the flavor of the month, if you will, is the toy stuff, but it's working and I'm enjoying the process. I don't see myself stopping for a very long time. Right. But because it is kind of gaining steam and I'm enjoying it so much, I have such a deep-seated fear of deviating at all. That it sucks, because, like, there are many people that, like, well, people have asked me privately or on Twitter or something, hey, have you gotten any games lately? Do you still play NES? I'm like, yeah, I have a ton of stuff. Yeah. Like, I know for you, you have pardon the phrase, a modest retro gaming collection of your own. There's a corner of the RetroBlasting headquarters that's dedicated to that stuff. I've seen it in different videos, things like that. But you tend to, it's not a subject matter on the channel much. Like, you talk about it in passing or what have you. Right. You did a whole video on, like, the Star Wars games and things like that, which was a really cool video and well done, by the way.
Thank you.
As someone who has had to capture video game play and having had to work with arcade cabinets in the past, even these newer ones with the flat screens, that's not an easy thing to do. And I knew that there was a process to go through it. Because even if you source an emulated version of the game for the capture, it's not going to be a one-to-one with what you have on the screen. Right. So there's no point in doing it that way, although from an editing perspective, it would be easier and you could kind of finagle it. So you have to go through a lot of different things, a very different style of workflow to make that happen. So I saw that. Having been there, I appreciated that. And although I would love to see more stuff like that because I am so into gaming, I understand why it's not there. And
I have a big script that I wrote that's just about video games, a specific video game I'm very passionate about. And it is a long-standing franchise. And I've got the whole script written. I wrote it like 3 or 4 years ago. It's called Tomb Raider, the story so far. And it was supposed to follow my Bespin Luke, the story so far. And I, as a gaming guy, you will appreciate this as part of that. It was me talking not just about my personal story with loving Indiana Jones, and that's why Gaming Toy Boy. Don't worry about that. I've noticed that every time I upload a new video, I lose subscribers. It's a thing with YouTube. I don't know what it is. It's like
It's
they're
true.
reminded they subscribed to you and they always meant to unsubscribe and you reminded them. It's weird.
Right.
But so I, was going to tie in my personal story talking about, my brother bought the game and then didn't like it, shoved it in a drawer. I pulled it out, put it on the PC that could barely run it in low res, but I played it in low res, and I would go to high res when I was standing still so I could see what was on the screen, go back to low res because the game was just so good. The whole story of it, the part that you'll appreciate is this wasn't just going to be about how the game's played. It was going to be about what impact it had on gaming and on me personally. And I said to myself, you know what? There are certain editions of these games, because I was a PC gamer when I first started that series. There were certain editions of those games that I had never really found in stores at the time,
Right.
So it just so happened at the time I was writing the script that Crystal Dynamics or Square Enix, I think it's Crystal Dynamics, they
were the developer. Yeah, Crystal Dynamics, the developer. Square Enix was the publisher.
Yes, they're the developer. Yeah, they were having a Tomb Raider anniversary about 5-6 years ago, whatever it was, 5 year ago. They were having an anniversary eBay sale. Like, in other words, they went into their office archives and pulled out select things that go all the way back to 1996 that they were just had extras of and stuff that were part of their office stuff, their internal collection that they put out on eBay. And some of it was, really high dollar stuff like, statues and this and that. That's not what I was interested in. What I was really, and, some of it was like, oh, these were, special metal keychain bracelets that were given out at E4 or is it E3, E4, whatever the
E3.
What's the name of the big gaming trade
E3.
show? E3.
E3.
We gave these out at E3 in 2000 for the launch of Tomb Raider Legend. It was stuff like that. But one of the things they had, which was the most fascinating to me, and this is a long way around my ass to get to my elbow, they had a box that was, you remember PC games used to be big box PC games. They all had
right. You'd get like a copy of Thexter, and it was like this big, and it's like a little 3.5 inch disc. Yeah.
Right. Well, the only box that I still had left was the original Tomb Raider box. I loved that game so much that I kept the big trapezoidal box. I bought the PC games for 2 and 3 and 4 and all the others, but I was in college then. So the boxes ended up getting sacrificed while I kept the disc, right?
Right.
They went, one of the auctions they had was they had gone into their small little, licensing warehouse of stuff, extras, whatever you want to call it, their marketing samples, whatever it was.
Sure.
And they had big box versions of all the games going all the way through. And they had Tomb Raider Gold Edition and Tomb Raider 2 and Tomb Raider 2 something edition and Tomb Raider add-on and Tomb Raider 3 and and they were all for sale at one time. They were like, these came right out of our personal. And I'm like, I gotta have that. And I got into a bidding war with people to get them all at once so that I have all of them to do actual B-roll with for this video. So yeah, man, like the gaming thing, Melinda tries to keep me not doing videos about gaming because her idea is that she wants video games to be a stress release for me. Because now most of my hobbies have become my job. And so she's like, well, with video games, you can just sit down. Like she's the one that bought me the PS4 because my computer is now, I invest in it for editing power. And I don't put anything that's going to tax the graphics card on it. It's a really good graphics card, but I don't want to wear it out. So like the most advanced thing that I play on my PC now is the 2002 Stronghold Crusader every now and then, just because it's like a nothing thing for this computer to run. It's practically like running Pac-Man. It's like whatever. But she bought me a PS4 out of nowhere and said, every year she like gets me some new games for it. And she knows that I'm real picky about my games. She's kind of learned what kind of games I like, and so she makes that a stress release for me. But I really enjoyed Horizon Zero Dawn. I thought that was a really cool game, and
it's been on the list forever.
Yeah,
I just haven't touched it. Yeah.
PS4 Spider-Man was a good game. Aside from the combat system, Jedi Fallen Order was a good game. Sekiro would have been a good game, but it was way too freaking hard. And then Ghost of Tsushima was a really good game. So I played through these games, but they're meant to be, kind of a kick my feet up kind of thing. And Melinda understands that like Tomb Raider is a different thing. That's like talking about Indiana Jones and Robin Hood. So like one day it will come around. But other than that, she tries to encourage me not to make, videos about games. So,
and I'm in a similar boat too. And what Melvor's saying, and it's like a natural crossover for retro and toys. I agree with that, and I know that Billy and Jay over at the Chasers, like they kind of struggle with that too. Where Jay has been saying for about 2 years, and I said, why don't we? Because they have two separate shows on the same channel, Toy Chasers and Game Chasers, same format, just different focuses. And it has felt like for a while he's just wanted to just meld the whole thing and just make it an overall geek culture chasing thing. And I think they should do it because at this point they've had enough goodwill from the community where both shows are kind of equally revered for the most part.
Right.
It would be less production for them. It would be easier to you could go, because one of the biggest problems you have when you're doing like a hunting video at a flea market or an antique shop or whatever, if you don't find anything, you have nothing to do with that footage. So we didn't find anything. And then you have nothing. You have nothing for your channel.
Right.
So it would be a way of kind of heading that off at the pass and trying to do this other thing. But I also have gotten to a point with the gaming where if I'm feeling restless or I've hit a roadblock in my head with how to approach something, or I'm stressed or whatever, what I used to do to make extra money would be stream Destiny. Like, on a long enough timeline, I was making a couple $100 a month here and there just for stuff.
Yeah.
And it was fine. And I enjoyed doing it because I love the community there and I loved what we were doing. And I still am going to come back to that on a limited engagement thing. But now, because toys immediately, like the second I bought a toy, I'm like, I want to make videos about this because I'm excited. I'm excited about something. I'm charged up. And although I am approaching things in a certain way with the collecting, I'm almost catering that hobby to the video production side of it, but still for my own enjoyment kind of a thing. But because the streaming of that gaming style has fallen off, and I'm not really doing it, games have kind of come back to where I can actually play them and have fun.
Right.
It's been a long time since I can honestly say that.
Yeah.
So I'll play Destiny for an hour or 2 hours, whereas before, 3 to 5 days a week, I was playing that thing for 4, 5, 6, sometimes 19 hours at a clip. And when you're doing it that much, like when the lights are off and everything's shut down, the last thing I want to do, it's kind of like, and I've told people this all the time. Like I spent a lot of my time in the professional world doing technical support, which I still do to a certain degree, but it was like that constant call center kind of a vibe. And people were like, well, can you help me fix such and such? And my off time, I'm like, I can, but I really don't want to.
Right.
Like ask the guy that works at 7-Eleven to take a road trip with you to a Circle K for the evening on his night off. There's that. I think a lot of people don't really understand that. And when you invest all of your time, whether it is paying your mortgage or not, you invest in this thing so much and you spend all these extra hours of your time, which is finite, especially as we move into middle age, that becomes more apparent. It's not easy to separate it from the endeavor.
Right.
So when you do have that escape, whether it be gaming or the toys or pizza or whatever it is, you tend to latch onto that and keep it. Because I think Melinda is correct. And then if you take everything that brings you joy and make a chore out of it, eventually you're going to run out of things and you're just going to be unhappy.
Yeah. And Melinda's point is that you're never going to be able to relax because there's nothing left for you to do to relax. And the other thing that she has noticed is that I can still be around the merchandise, the physical stuff, the physical, byproduct of pop culture, is
Mhm.
as long as I'm just like, because she found out just by getting to know me, I didn't even recognize it in myself, but um, if I have a bin to sort through, or I have things to just kind of, I think it goes back to my model kit days where I liked putting things together and getting things, or even sometimes she'll say, do you have a toy that you need to take apart and fix, or something like that? Or like if it's something like that where I can sort through a bin of comic books, or I can sort through, and figure out what I have, which could lead to a video idea. But the point is that it gets me away from a screen, and it allows me to sit with her and the cats, and I've got this thing that I can focus on that's a physical object, and I'm pulling things out of it or putting things into it or taking mental notes of what I've got versus what I don't have. And that's as helpful as shooting arrows in the backyard when the weather permits, or sitting in front of a relaxing video game. And
Right. Absolutely. And you have to carve something out for yourself.
uh-huh.
Because I was never a person who, I might binge watch stuff from time to time. Like right now,
Mhm.
I'm on a tear with Battlestar Galactica, and but there will be long stretches where I won't touch anything. Like I might
Mhm.
watch YouTube videos. There'll be like a 3 month stint where if I'm playing a game, my background is going to be just music. I just want to listen to
Right.
music, but it goes in phases
Yep.
where
Yep.
whatever that thing that's distracting me that gives me a spark. And I find that if
Mhm.
you do, because there are people that all they do is watch reality TV. I can't stomach
Oh,
that
I can't
trash.
do that. I can't do
There
that.
and there's and whatever is passing for sitcoms now.
Uh-huh.
No, thank you. I don't understand. So coming to Rebel Wookie's comment here, he doesn't really understand gamers. He's not judging, but doesn't see how they have
Mhm.
time to devote to it. Well, 9 times out of 10, if I'm playing a game, unless it's very, very story driven, like if I'm just doing it for the action of just having some fun and doing mechanics, whether it's
Mhm.
like a Tetris thing or a shooter or something like that, I'm usually listening to a podcast or a YouTube video or a television show, and I'm half focused on both and just kind of imbibing at that level.
Mhm.
Um, or rather than sitting down to watch a television show that I'm dedicated to or whatever. Like the somewhere in the last 15 years, the concept of like, well, this show is on at this time. I'm just like, I don't care. I'll
Yeah,
watch it when I
I'm the
feel like I'm
same
going to
way.
watch it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I watch, like I said, I will spend one time a year, watching Colditz. And I know that sounds like when you hear somebody say, yeah, I don't pay attention to modern TV. And every year I pick a time and I watch the same TV show. I don't mean it like that. I'll watch other stuff as well throughout the year.
Hmm.
Um, but I'm, but, but Colditz, Dad's Army, shows like that, Combat, those shows tend to be ones that I know are for me. Like I'm not
Hmm.
going to end up, because most of my time watching a TV show these days is like, you got to watch all 65 episodes of Bionic 6 before June.
Right.
And it's like, ugh, but it gets you in a mindset, because you go,
Hmm.
if I'm going to plant my butt down and watch 7 hours of television, it would be stupid to not chisel my way through MacGyver season 3, because I've got a video coming out about that, or Space 1999, or take your pick.
Right.
One of those things has been sitting around that needs, attention for video. And that's what Melinda, rightfully wants me to divorce myself from for relaxation purposes. She's like, you're not relaxing if you're watching something for work, even though you're sitting down. She's like, I don't care that you're sitting there not doing anything watching Bionic 6. She goes, I don't care that it puts you to sleep half the time and you got to wake up and rewind it. She says, that's not relaxing. She's like, that's working yourself
Hmm.
into a coma is what you're doing.
Right.
And I'm like, all right, fine. So, I take this phone and I go upstairs and I put this phone on her office desk, not because she told me to, it's because it's what I do for me. Like I'll go and I'll put this phone on her office desk, and then I'll go downstairs and then I'll put on Colditz or Dad's Army or something, because then
Hmm.
this isn't buzzing and distracting me from enjoying my relaxation. And it's amazing, people, they talk about how you can get addicted to cell phones, and you really can, but it's also amazing how quickly you can unaddict from a cell phone.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
like take today, for example.
Yeah.
Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp were down.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that a large portion of my day is just checking certain things on certain intervals.
Right.
Knowing that wasn't possible, I was like, "Ooh, I've got so much more time."
Right.
And it's crazy. Before we get too far off this point,
just to show you,
Tony,
my Tomb Raider fandom is on my phone there. So
for realsies.
Yep.
Tony has a great suggestion for your stress release.
Okay.
You could always shoot fungo pops with your longbow.
I could. That's true.
And you know what? I have some extras that were gifted to me that I don't want. I'll happily send them to you for that purpose.
Sounds wonderful.
Happily.
Master Son, I'm not trying to disrespect Bionic 6. It's just a run-on joke here. That's all. I'm just trying to make Tim mad. I love you, dude, and I never want to make you upset, Master Son. I love you like a brother.
And we sure do appreciate you as well, man. So Raymond Huey has a great question. He says, awesome line stream. Thank you. We appreciate that. The question is, what is the last good book that you read for fun?
Oh, the last good book I read for fun. I read a lot of history. It changed somewhere around college. I don't know why. I used to read a lot of fiction. Like I read a lot of fiction. And I still will, find the time to like read a few chapters of Lord of the Rings and stuff like that, every few years. But in college, I really switched over into not just because I already loved history, but now I wanted to read history. Like those books were not boring to me. I wanted to buy books about the Crusades and, the Battle of Britain and, Pilate's memoirs and stuff like that. And but the last good book that I read for fun, it was either the book that Melinda's mother got me for Christmas about the Battle of Britain. It's a brand new book. Well, I say brand new. It's probably like 4 years old now, but it's a newer book about it. Or, there's a book that I read called Dungeon, Fire, and Sword. It is a older historical historical work about all the Crusades. But what's nice about it is that it gives some very detailed accounts of a lot of things that don't make it into like a lot of these books, they focus on one crusade. It's either like the First Crusade or the Third Crusade. This book really talks about all of them in depth and the periods in between. It's like this one unbroken chronology. I started reading it. This is really going to show how bad I've gotten at reading. I've read a lot of stuff in between what I'm about to tell you, everybody, so don't panic. I started reading this book in 2003, and I read all the way up through the Third Crusade. And then I had to put it down because I was in grad school, and I got distracted. And then Ridley Scott's Kingdom of Heaven came out, and I started looking into what Kingdom of Heaven's story was. And I realized, oh, wow, I've already read all about that in Dungeon, Fire, and Sword. So then I went to see the movie, and the movie took gross liberties with the history, which kind of bummed me out. Thankfully, the director's cut exists, which is still historical fiction, but at least it's watchable historical fiction, that aside. So I recently unearthed the book because it actually got lost for a long time. And I was rereading that. I've also been reading it is for fun and research. Okay. So I've also been reading Howard Pyle's The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood, which is a classic telling of Robin Hood. And there's another book that I have that I need to read. It is I read Thor Ewing's recent work. Really nice guy. I believe he's Scottish. If not, he's Northern English. Really nice guy. He wrote a book called The Original Robin Hood, where he translated all the original ballads, a new translation. And I also have the original Ritson collection in the leather-bound, gold-gilt page Easton Press edition that was from 17-something, where he was the first guy to take all the ballads and put them into one book. So I
It's like
got
the first compilation of them.
Yeah,
I gotcha.
yeah, and it's a recreation of that. So but that I know, Raymond, that's probably not exactly what you're asking, because I'm sort of doing that for work, but I'm also kind of doing that for fun. So I don't know if that's fair. Is that a fair answer? I guess it's a fair answer.
I think so, because the first part of the answer definitely spoke to it. And while you were telling that story, Master Son donated to the channel. We don't have super chat here because I'm not monetized, and spoilers, I'm probably never going to be monetized again because of my filthy mouth. So I have to go through other punk means to do it. But Master Son, very generous donation, says, "Thank you for hosting this conversation and tolerating Michael. It's not a tolerance thing at all." I know you're joking, Master Son. And
Master Son and I are in-person friends. We don't live in the same state, which is a travesty, because I would have him over 6 days a week. The seventh day would be for him to get a break from me. But like, he's a really good guy. He's one of the best people I've ever met. So yeah, he's good people.
Yeah, he's definitely great. But for those that maybe don't know him from, because I don't know if y'all have noticed this, chat, but I'm in almost every live stream in the Greater Iconicon community. Right. I find a way in there, because I love the community so much. I just never want to let go. And like on Saturday, I was like, oh, okay, so you got this, and then like, here's a few gaps. I'm like, I'm gonna do a live stream with Dean here. And then I'm going to do my video premiere after the Analog Toys stream, and that we're just going to go. Yeah. And it was way too much work to do relative to the, spark. But I love doing it because I know that people appreciate having that mini Iconicon experience of just going from video to stream to stream to stream. I enjoy doing that, so I hope you guys enjoy that too, because it is extra work. And I'm like, oh shit, there's an opportunity. I want to make a video real quick and make it happen. So it's fun. But to answer the question from Raymond, I am very much like Michael in that I enjoy reading when I can, but finding the time to carve it out is difficult because I get easily distracted. Yep. And I don't read the way that I used to when I was a kid. I read fiction a ton until right around end of middle school, going into high school. And then I got really fascinated with nonfiction because I liked seeing how the sausage was made. So I really enjoyed books based on how to learn a skill or a biography of a director or an actor or a band. And I would read magazines. Like when all my friends were out zooming girls and drinking and whatever else in high school, I was at home with headphones on, listening to music and reading about bands, filmmaking, all this stuff. That was what I was into. And then I started to get into, as I got older, after in the Marine Corps, you get to reading a lot of things like how to better yourself within that. So I got to, and then again, war history was a big thing for me as well. But I was looking more from the tactical side of it, like the tactical history and how warfighting tactics have changed. And I got into all that stuff for a while. And then I found myself at an impasse. And I started reading in I was pursuing a graduate degree in education. So I was going after theoretical stuff for that. So there's this one book called The Art of Changing the Brain by Dr. James Zull. He is chief neurologist and also on the board of education or board of directors for University of Maryland. And he takes this really heady neurological subject of how imparting emotional impact when you're delivering information increases knowledge retention. So that's why you remember the funny teacher or the jerk teacher, and the bland ones, they just fly out of your head. So I kind of started using that with the technical support work that I had been doing, because if you can deliver it with a joke, they're going to understand and learn how to do this so they don't call as much, which doesn't cost the company as much, which goes back to my organizational psychology degree. Thinking numbers all the time. How can I make this better? So long story short, I got into just that kind of thing, and then I really had a tear about 5 or 6 years ago where I was just reading a lot of autobiographies. And the one that sticks out the most for me, which is a big departure for me, was Betty White's autobiography, which is called If You Ask Me, But I Know You Won't, or you didn't, or something like that. Whimsy from start to finish, but a lot of great insight on how the industry has changed and how interpersonal connections within Hollywood have changed. And then I went back and I read it again, but this time with the audiobook on, so it's in her voice and you get to do the whole thing.
Yeah.
And it's a whole other experience when you do that. Now I just kick up my feet on the couch and just sit and just immerse yourself in the Betty White.
Sorry, I didn't mean to step on you. That's just a great. You reminded me. That's a great reminder, because one of the books, I forgot about the whole audiobook thing. Technically, I mean, you're listening to it, you're not reading it, but for pure pleasure, I listened to, in his voice, Richard Ayawade's book, his comedic analysis, while weaving in his deep thoughts about his own life, of the Gwyneth Paltrow movie View from the Top. It is the most surreal, hilarious thing. It's such a weird book. It's called Richard Ayawade something on top. Or maybe it's Ayawade on Top, and maybe that's the name of it. But it's like this comedic deconstruction of this really pithy rom-com, which he knows is a really bad movie. And then he tries to make it like fake pretentious about his life and all this kind of. It's really funny. But there's two books that I want to pick up and read purely for pleasure soon. They are both biographies about two different individuals that were at Colditz in polar opposite scenarios. So the famous book, the Colditz, the full story by Peter Reed, who his memoir is what the movie and the TV show were both based on. And during the watching of the TV show originally, you get to know the German commandant and his security officer. The show has some artistic license in places because it's a series. However, it never goes overboard, and it's very restrained. And so at one point when I was watching it, because I'm the type of guy that loves to throw arguments in the trash in historical discussions about World War II. I hate it when people go, well, the Germans did have the best uniforms. And it's like, shut up. And, you got to respect that German war machine. No, you don't. Like, I'm that guy who's like, no, you don't. And that's kind of a weird, like, edgy cop-out where you're kind of blurring the line between admiration and everything else. And we don't really need to go there. Well, if you watch this show, it is established that the commandant and the security officer, who is his right-hand man, are both Army reservists who are veterans of the First World War. They are not members of the Nazi Party. And over time, you start to actually kind of admire these guys. Like, they're not doing anything heinous to the prisoners. They're just going by the book and the Geneva Convention, and they're trying to just, do their job and also keep the Gestapo and the SS out of the prison. They're trying to do all this stuff. And at one point I thought, is this artistic license and I'm being unwittingly manipulated? Like, am I being unwittingly manipulated into having a sympathetic view for these people who in history may not have been great people? Like they may have been scumbags and war criminals and all kinds of. So I went looking into this, not expecting to find out that the security officer, whose real name was Eggers, his rank was Hauptmann, Hauptmann Eggers, he wrote his own biography about being the security officer at Colditz, called Colditz, the German Story. And as I haven't gotten the book yet, I'm going to buy both books and read them almost back to back. But the fascinating thing I found out was Colditz Castle is in the eastern part of Germany. So after the war was over, that sort of got annexed by the Russians. And I guess he lived somewhere in the area. And, that was a dangerous thing to be a German soldier and the Russians, get you. Well, he was always known by the prisoners as this guy who was very, reserved, and he didn't get emotional, but he wasn't impolite. He always did things by the book. He treated his job as if he was the disciplinarian of a boarding school rather than of combatants. So he never he never like viciously tortured people or injured people, or he didn't do anything sadistic. He was just like, okay, you've tried to escape. You know what that means. 2 weeks in solitary, go do your thing. And they would snatch his hat off of his head and he wouldn't like go crazy. He'd just look over it because, they loved to mess with the guards. And he would just be like, he'd look at his guy and he'd be like, "Private, can you go get me a spare hat out of my office, or whatever." And he was just very zen about the whole thing. So what I found out was, and this is why I want to read his autobiography, after the war, and I know the audience now is probably like, why is Michael on this tear? But just hear me out. So after the war, he is investigated by the Germans, who are auditing every former German soldier that they now have purview over because they took half of Germany, right? And they determine, they're like, "Oh, you never joined the Nazi party." And he's like, "No, I'm career military. I was a reservist, World War I veteran." He's like, "And I was called back into service by the German government, the Wehrmacht, and I went and did my duty, and now I'm here." And they're like, "Wow." And they're like, "Okay, well, you can go live your life." And he was like, "Cool." And then like 6 months later, they come knocking around again. And they're like, "Hey, we have some people who seem to believe that there might have been Gestapo elements embedded in the prison that you worked at. So we're going to investigate you again. And now we're putting you on trial." And he's like, "But I'm not part of any of that. Like, I'm just," and they're like, "Oh, guilty. You're going to a labor camp for 10 years. And he was like, "Oh." So this guy who was already in World War II past combat age, like he was a reservist, whatever. And I can't remember exactly how it fell out. That World War I part might have actually been part of the TV show. But either way, he was the guy at Colditz, this guy Eggers, right? He goes to this labor camp, survives, does his time, comes back, and after he gets out, he finds out that Peter Reed had written this book. So he writes this other book and about his experience. Well, what all starts to come to the surface is all of the prisoners really respected this guy because he didn't abuse them. He wasn't dogmatic. He wasn't a psychopath. He, abided by the Geneva Convention, all this kind of stuff. Now, the things I'm telling you, it's weird for me to be saying this kind of stuff because I just told you I'm not into people who are like, "Oh, I love those uniforms. I hate all that crap." So they would invite this guy to their reunions. So even though he was the security officer that was in charge of putting them in solitary when they got caught or messed up or infracted the rules or whatever it was, when they had their annual Colditz veteran reunions, he got invited. And
that's incredible.
I mean, so I have to know. So Raymond, that long answer is to say, I will be reading that next. I have to know what that's all about. I have to know who this guy was. So.
And I have to call something out right now.
Yeah.
There's only one person in the whole of Western civilization history that gets a free pass when talking about the aesthetic of the Nazi uniform, and that's Lemmy Kilmister from Motorhead. That's the only person that ever gets that pass as far as I'm concerned. Anybody else, I'm like, you're a weirdo, but Lemmy is Lemmy. Or, even though his body is dead, Lemmy is still Lemmy. Like, he's still the shockwaves in culture, right? That's the whole other thing.
I just love reading about history, and especially when I find out that a show that I'm really enjoying actually tried to get the important things right to the level that I'm now like, oh, I don't have to feel bad about how I'm feeling in this moment about this show. That's huge to me, especially in that subject area, So
because it's touchy enough without there being these kind of, as you say, creative license where it's like, there's a lot of Vietnam films where I'm just like, I did like the stretch in the 80s of Vietnam films that did show that we weren't very much the good guys. It was like, hey, we were doing some heinous shit over there. And I rather enjoy it is not necessarily an appropriate word, but I was happy to be privy to that information at an early age,
Right.
for sure. But to come back around to books a little bit, Master Son brings up that he listens to Heinlein on like Star Troopers Friday. My father had an intense obsession with Heinlein, and I inherited his Heinlein book collection when he died. And there's a whole big stack of them, and I read about one every 5 years because I'm like, when I run out of these, I don't know, I'm not going to go back and read them again necessarily. But for me, it's a way to connect to my father.
Right.
So I just kind of every so often I'll bust one of them out, but I don't really view it as viewing or reading for fun.
Right.
I'm reading to gain insight into who my father was. So that's a whole different thing. I didn't mean to bring the stream down, chat. I really didn't.
Matter of fact, Master Son is sitting there worried that the trolls are going to twist what I just said about Eggers. And
I saw that.
Yeah,
I saw that.
They'll take it out of context, but I'll just repeat it again. No, I have an intense black and white distaste for the enemy, and so no, I don't. And that's why I was feeling uncomfortable about how I was feeling during that show, and then to find out that the guys who were actually in there were saying, no, this guy wasn't that guy. It's like, okay, that's why they did it this way. That's why the show is making a point of this. Good. It's not manipulation. Great. So yeah.
Right. And to put a finer point on it, there's something I say at least twice a week: Nazi punks, fuck off. I have actually stopped live shows. Right. I actually remember in 1996. This is back when this could still happen at a show. You don't see it as much now, but back then, at a regional or a more of a lower level gig, what we call a tier 1 gig, where you've got like one kind of big draw, and then you got all the local bands opening up. There was a big punk scene in Pittsburgh at the time. It was a big death metal scene there. And then there was something in the middle, what we used to call college metal, which were the guys that had like looks like they're wearing a chain from dog tags, but the balls are this freaking big around. Yep. You know what I'm talking about. Like those cats with the math teacher glasses and the backpacks. They were like the college metal guys. You'd have this whole big mix of people. Every so often, some Nazi skin would show up, and he would sneak in because shaved head was a thing at the time.
Right.
And we had a couple black fans that were really into all of that music. They were very eclectic listeners and just really into it. And we're playing, I'm blasting away, doing my thing, but I had a good view of the audience. And I see this guy who's clearly got an armband on that he just turned around to show the swastika. And as soon as he did that, he just punched the guy right in the face and starts beating him down.
Right.
My sticks went one way, the drum set went the other, and I leapt off the stage and did like almost a diving Batman kick into his face. Yep. Stopped the show. Huge fight. Yes, huge fight broke out. Spoilers. Good-natured people won. No one got arrested except for the skinhead, because we were like, he fell. He fell.
Right.
And there's a statute of limitations on assault in Pennsylvania, so all right, no big deal.
Yeah. Exactly.
But yeah, I would not be friends with a guy like Michael French if I thought there was even a moment.
No.
Like, you can be a historical enthusiast, and you have to remember that history as culture as well, it is not one overall thing that happened you have to judge black or white by itself. Right. Human beings, individual stories make up everything that we chronicle in existence as we know it.
Yeah.
And you cannot tell me that in any war, regardless of how divisive that war might be, that there aren't people on, to quote George Lucas, there's heroes on both sides. Sure, that's the one time where it's like, okay, yeah, George, you kind of got me there. And oh wait, I can't talk about toys. Never mind. But there's something
I can spin this in another quick direction that's kind of fun.
Okay.
Funny, weird, funny, haha, depending on your sense of humor.
Okay.
When I was in my office job in my corporate career, I had just gone to work for a cable company after working for UPS for a long time, UPS corporate. I would in the fall and winter and into the early spring, I would often wear RAF battle jackets with my because it was like business casual. So you'd have like people wearing khakis, whether it was, Navy khakis or, whatever. And these are those waist fitted, with the belts, the you've seen the British jackets in the movies. They're waist fitted.
Oh, yeah.
They've got they're made of wool, and they've got and I would, they would, what do you call it? They would scuttle, they'd have the scuttlebutt, going on, because that's all people do in corporations is gossip. And I got asked to come see my boss one day. And this jacket, by the way, does not have any patches on it. Like, it's just a blue, gray wool waist fitted jacket, right? It's not. Right. So I had a brown one. I had a British Army one as well that I'd wear with brown khakis. And it was only because, there's office cold in the winter, where it's like, it's cold enough that you don't just want to be in your button down shirt, but you also need something, and you can't wear a coat all day because you got to go into meetings. It's the perfect weight for that, right? So I go into his office, and the guy says, "Hey, I got to talk to you for a minute." I'm like, "Okay." And I said, "What's up?" He goes, "Well, some people in the department, I can't say who." And I'm like, "Of course you can't, because nobody gets to face their accuser anymore." He goes, "They are uncomfortable with what you're wearing to work." And I went, and I'm thinking like, and I looked right at him with no irony, no sense of humor, like no intent for humor. And I said, "Chris, are my pants too tight in the back? Are they riding up my rear end? Like, what's the problem?" And he goes, no, it's not that. I said, "Was it my shoes? Are they not clean enough? Like, what?" Because corporate people are into really shallow shit. Like, they're
right.
They fix it on really shallow stuff. And he said, "No." He said, "It's those jackets that you're wearing, like the one right now." And I've only got 2 of them, by the way,
right.
2 colors of the same jacket, just in 2 different colors. As far as they know, I've only got 2 of them. And I went, my what?" And he said, "Somebody was complaining that you were wearing Nazi uniform stuff." And I was like, "Chris, look, man, I don't know what you know about things, but I'll tell you right now," I said, "whoever it is couldn't be more wrong." And he was like, "Well," I said, "this is Royal Air Force, World War II RAF." I said, "And I don't know if that means anything to you." I said, "But these are my heroes. These are the guys that were fighting those bastards off of our shores and killing them. These were the guys that were holding the line." I was like, "These are the guys that literally sent those guys packing right back to hell." And he was like, you could see him just kind of being like, I said, "I wear this for practicality, but also because these guys are my heroes." And I'm like, and for somebody, some ignoramus, to sit there and say that this jacket is from the people that these guys were fighting, I find offensive. I said, I find it offensive. And I was like, and it's totally ignorant. And then to spread those rumors around when you don't know jack about what you're talking about. And again, not one patch or insignia was on this jacket. It was a clean reproduction battle dress jacket, just blue gray wool. That's it. There was nothing on it to indicate anything else. And he was like, "Oh, well, I'll go back." And I said, "I will make this an HR problem if I have to. And I don't want to do that." I never heard a word about it again. Yeah.
As you should not have.
Yeah.
And Master Son has a cool thing. He says, "Check this out. The book Michael wants to read is by Reinhold Eggers. Reinhold was also the first name of Dan Fielding. Creation of man like Reinhold wrote Night Court." Yeah, I picked up on that because I am a huge Night Court fan.
Oh, me too. Master Son did me like one of the nicest things that any friend's ever done for me. He surprised me with, in the mail, the entire Night Court DVD set, which is not an easy thing to get a hold of.
It is not. It is. They still make it, but it's print to order, and it's exorbitantly expensive for what it is. Yes. I have, shall we say, acquired the show through other means.
Yes.
But I will eventually get the DVDs.
You
But
know what, man? Nobody's judging you here. It's all good.
No, that's fair. But this will be on the internet ever, so
Right.
you know.
They're going to be more fixated on the fact that apparently I'm some sort of sympathizer, which I'm not. But
Right.
whatever. Right.
NBC Universal. I have a subscription to Peacock. Please don't raid my house. But that said, like we were talking about like disconnecting from things. So when I was working in corporate, I was working for a private university doing admissions and stuff like that, and I worked with like the veterans and military aspect of it. And I would work in downtown Chicago. I lived in Aurora, which is nothing like Wayne's World. Sorry, guys. But I would take the train in. It would be at least an hour on the express train all the way in. And I would do the whole 9-hour workday thing, come back, and 2 or 3 days a week, I would stop halfway and do rehearsal with my band, which was semi-pro at the time. We were getting paid and all that stuff, but it wasn't huge. We couldn't pay the bills yet. Well, technically, never actually got to pay the bills. But point being, we would do that for 3 hours or whatever. I'd get on the train and come home. So by then, it was like this 15-hour day, and I'd have to get up and do it the next day. Mm-hmm. The one thing I allowed myself after all of that work for a release, because again, your hobbies become your job, like the band, it's a thing. So I would come home, I would crack open a light beer back then, one beer, and I would watch an episode of Night Court and then go to sleep and get up and do it all over again. And it was an escape, and it's one of the few pieces of pop culture that remains untouched.
Yes.
No one's really tried to remake it.
And yet now,
I heard. Please don't. Oh God.
Look. I'm not saying I'm happy about it. But I'm so used to it at this point. It's like, and another remake that I'm not going to be interested in. Everyone's going to ask me if I was going to watch it or not. I'm not gonna. And then they're going to be like, "Why don't you give it a chance?" I'm going to be like, "Because I got too much crap to do." So yeah, no, I know.
Scott Hughes says, only thing about some Vietnam movies paints the whole U.S. military as nefarious, proud son, nom-vet. Those bad apples are not the majority, but they make for good movies. I don't disagree. I know enough Vietnam vets to know that, if we were like that all the time, we would probably still be at war with someone down there right now. I totally get that.
I have never seen a Vietnam movie as offensive in that regard as Fury was for World War II.
I think I saw like half of that.
Fury is repugnant. It is a repugnant movie. And as far as doing that whole thing where it's like, everybody in a war is bad, and it's like, oh wow,
no,
okay.
Not really.
And
it's just not there. It isn't always all black and white. There's a lot of gray in war.
Right.
You have, because as someone who worked in the intelligence realm, I can tell you that it's not that American military is just that good at digging out information from people. And it's not all tortured. It's not all Guantanamo Bay bullshit either.
Yep.
Like, there are people, indigenous people, that don't believe in what their government or their countrymen are doing and want to help at least just to end it.
Yes.
And they will do it by any means necessary, and they'll risk their lives, their families, and give information just for the sake of trying to put in a somewhat peaceful end or a sooner end to something that is distasteful for all parties involved.
Yeah.
So I don't buy the whole it's all this or it's all that. And as we go on, as warfare tactics become more and more digital, and information gathering becomes more and more, for lack of a better term, invasive and pervasive. It's only getting grayer and grayer and grayer. I'm not turning this into a political stream. This is not about modern warfare in any way, shape, or form, but I wanted to bring that point up because I know where he's coming from when he says that, because it's 100% true. And I'm glad that he brought it up. So, James Salzberg, welcome back, by the way. Fury sucks. I got it for $3 on digital. Hated it so much. Is the red line. There you go.
It's horrible.
Yeah, and this is part of why I stick to documentaries more than I do fictional film.
Yep.
Like, I basically am at a point where there's certain tentpole things that I will watch eventually. Like, I will come around to a Star Wars film just so I can be in on the conversation most of the time. I will do the MCU stuff because, for the most part, I'm on board with them. There are some times I'm going, really? You made that choice? Okay. All right. Let's
Right.
see how it pans out. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it doesn't. And folks, this is what we originally were going to discuss. We were going to talk MCU. And I thought, you know what? No, we've had a little bit too much of the critical stuff and blowing up on our faces collectively as a community. And I said, we'll hold off a couple months on that.
Okay.
Let me, let's lick our collective wounds for a couple months and have some fun for a while. We'll come back to beating up on the industry a little bit later. But I will still watch those films because I have such a love of those characters. But generally speaking, I want to hear about real stuff. I want to know, again, how the sausage is made. Like I buy Blu-rays all the time. I buy at least a couple a week, and I'm always going for the edition that has the behind the scenes, the BTS, if you will, and the different. I want to know as much as I can, and I like looking into things like we talked about on Messenger one time, Trinity and Beyond, which is a nuclear war documentary, which is very well done. The soundtrack alone is worth watching that film. It's a completely original score with Siberian Orchestra, and it's gigantic and it's huge. And I agree, Tony, that Fury is more offensive than Andrew Dice Clay without it. And World War I was all the fault of the Hooyah. Like, be horrible. But I just really, I'm not sure if it's an entertainment thing or if it's a learning thing or somewhere in the middle, where I just like knowing the real story.
Right.
Because I've whether it's because I've seen so many films and the films we grew up on were very sensationalized, whereas you find out archaeologists aren't really that cool or whatever. Lethal Weapon, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Star Wars, Rambo, the list goes on, all the Iron Eagle, Top Gun, where things are not illustrated in a realistic way, really at all. And the more I learned about Top Gun, I'm like, geez, they screwed the pooch on this one. Right. But that movie still got me laid a couple times, so it's totally fine. But what I'm getting at is that because the entertainment that I enjoy is so far removed from reality, I said, okay, I'm just going to stop because they're getting it wrong. I want to learn how things actually were done. I will sometimes delve into the true crime stuff here and there if it's a really interesting case, but I know some folks that that's all they watch, and I'm like, how is this relaxing to you? He went into her house and stalked her for 3 days, and then he killed her. Like, how is that in any way a relaxation tactic whatsoever? I don't understand. But I just, for me, I enjoy that stuff, and I know that you tend to toe that line in many ways as well. You like learning about things as much as being entertained.
Yep.
Do you find that the more time that goes on, entertainment based on reality in terms of like a fictionalized or hyper-realistic show, even if they get the facts right, do you find yourself kind of detached from it if you know the history of it? Like a great example of that for me is the Queen biopic, because they got everything wrong, even though Queen was directly involved. Like the entire timeline is screwed, events were completely fabricated, and as a super fan of Queen, I was like, great performances, great production value, but I can't get invested because I know you're telling the wrong story. Do you find that with some stuff like that?
I mean, in certain ways, like somebody asked me the other day, they sent me a message saying, I heard that you really liked the director's cut of Kingdom of Heaven. I really hated the theatrical cut like you did. Can you sell me on, convince me to watch it? Because I'm really worried, whatever. And I wrote the guy back and I said, look, I don't know how much of a historian you are. I said, but I'm going to assume, based on why you didn't like it the first time, I'm going to assume that's part of the reason why. And I'll just be straight up with you. Like, I'm a huge historian too for the things I'm interested in. And no, this film is still very much historical fiction in the first third. The setup is all wrong. I said, it's not until Orlando Bloom gets to Jerusalem that the director's cut is starting to be a very watchable thing. I said, and even with that, there are still things that are historical inaccuracies in it that they do for the sake of drama. The real Balian never had an affair with the Queen Queen Isabella. That was never a thing. He was a married nobleman that was born in the Holy Land. He was not a French blacksmith that murdered a priest. He was not. All that was done for drama. I said, that's all still going to be there no matter what. I said, but as a historical fiction piece that gives you the broad strokes of what actually happened during that time period between those two engagements. Once you get to Israel or Palestine or whatever they called it back then, Outremer, once you get there, the film is really much more of the film we wanted to see. The first part is a write-off. It's always going to be a write-off. And so that's what I try and do with some of that stuff. Like there are some where, and not no pun intended, there are some films that are a bridge too far, not the film itself, the turn of phrase.
Right.
Where, because that movie is actually pretty decent, aside from some weird cinematic stuff that's very early to mid 70s that is still in there, but we won't go into that. Some of the US Army stuff toward the beginning looks like footage that was shot in a Dukes of Hazzard episode. I don't know why, it just does. But other than that, but like Fury, Thin Red Line, I even put Saving Private Ryan in there. These are manipulative postmodern films that are trying to push an agenda from a filmmaker and screenwriters that weren't there. And if you are, I don't mind if you tell a fictional story, as long as your fictional story for the history has no pretense. So, for example, Kingdom of Heaven, it wants to be historical fiction, and yet at the same time, it recognized that the most amazing, unbelievable parts of the story are the ones that are true. So in a way, you look at it and you go, this actually is a kind of education. It's a primer. Barring some of the stuff that they did for the intrigue or whatever. Whereas with World War II stuff like Private Ryan, I look at it and I go, okay, aside from the first 20 minutes, which is a complete replica of what it would have been like to be on the landing beaches, aside from that, the rest of the movie leans on that as capital to sell you a complete BS story, which is not realistic in any way. And it's trying to be much like Thin Red Line, this artistic visual poem. And it's like, that's not, I don't mind fiction as long as it doesn't masquerade itself as history. So, for example, I think The Big Red One is a much better Private Ryan than Private Ryan. The Big Red One was actually made by a guy who was there, and he is retelling his experience through the lens of a mix of real firsthand experience and his own artistic mind. So I'm okay with that. Similarly, Where Eagles Dare with Clint Eastwood and Richard Burton is a full-on World War II fictional romp. And it does not pretend to be anything else. It's like, this is a fun book that was written by the guy that wrote Guns and Navarone. You're going to love it. It's just a rollicking action movie that takes place in a Nazi castle. I'm good. Like, I got no problem with that either. Sign me up. I'll stare at Ingrid Pitt all day. But the Private Ryans, the Thin Red Lines, the Furies, those kind of things.
Based on a true story. Like that whole thing. Yeah.
Even with Private Ryan, it's like, well, it's an amalgamation of true events. And it's like, no, it's really not. Like,
if by true events you mean Normandy was stormed, they wore these uniforms, Nazis and Americans died, stuff was crazy. Like, that is certainly an amalgamation of those true events. You bet. And yes, there were certain regulations in place where you couldn't kill off a whole generation of soldiers. That's all true.
Right.
But
if you watch Private Ryan's original marketing, you'll sit back and go, yeah, they never say it's based on a true story for legal purposes. But do you remember all of the hype around that movie? Oh, yeah, I heard from Entertainment Tonight, or I heard from the Good Morning America show, or I heard from an interview I saw with Matt Damon, or I heard from an interview with Steven Spielberg. This is actually like based on something that really happened. Everybody thought it. And what did the movie studio do? They just quietly let that ride. They were like, yeah, let's let everyone think that. Go ahead. It's deceptive. It's
yeah.
So.
And I hate to burst Jim Largo's bubble, but Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is not a documentary about galactic politics. I'm sorry. much to my chagrin, I wish that it was something better. It's a whole thing.
I'll answer Murray's question about Cross of Iron. Seen Cross of Iron.
Up here.
Really enjoyed it up until, I want to say, the end. I think it was the ending of it that just really, I'd have to go back and rewatch it, but I remember at the time I was really appreciating the film up until the last half of the last act. And then I felt like the film, Peckinpah just couldn't help himself at that point, and it just became this really weird movie. So yeah, really enjoyed it until that last bit. So
I hate it when a movie ruins itself in the third act.
Yeah.
Or the opposite, where it's a slog and the third act is amazing, and you always want to watch it back for that third act, and you're like,
yeah,
it's the whole good bad movie thing.
Mm-hmm.
Tony says, Thin Red Line is a boring film about nothing, but I'll admit to preferring that over the grossly offensive nature of Fury.
True. I give you that all day. Yep.
And I think there's a lot of examples of that. But in any case, I keep meaning to bring up the time, but it just keeps flying on us. We're coming up on 3 hours of time that you've spent here. We both could talk. We're both talkers. Let's be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really have anything else I'm looking to do, but I know that the viewership is just like, oh, geez, Louise, these guys just shut up. I'm sure that there's somewhere in the back of someone's mind is like, I want to support. I want to be here, but I only have so much in my ears that I can take these two middle-aged men talking about not toys, and I can understand that. So I think we're going to start to try and come to some sort of a conclusion.
Okay.
And Bjorn, definitely, I love it. He says, has it really been that long? I appreciate you, brother. I really appreciate you. Yeah, Patriot was not historically accurate. Absolutely not. It was, it was Mel Gibson's answer to The Last of the Mohicans, basically, which is a whole, I could go on to a whole detail of that. And, Braveheart, which someone brought up in chat, and I'm like, no. They like, even the BTS stuff for that film tries to sell the film as this historical document, even though they say that there's a lot of like liberties that they took, and they admit to it and so forth. But it is what it is. So here's the deal. I'm taking the kid gloves off. We don't have to like consciously avoid anything in terms of subject matter, but
go for it.
We've covered a lot of. I'm just trying to think. We've covered a lot of stuff, and I forgot where I was going. Okay, just out of nowhere, what is the most historically accurate line of toys you can think of, if there is such a thing?
I guess it would be the 21st Century Toys / Motorwork / Ultimate Soldier XD toys from the 2000s that were trying to be. They weren't the most durable toys, but they were trying to be. They did a World War II line with German, American, Brit soldiers with the fighter planes that were true to scale for 3 3/4 inch figures. And they did a lot of the different fighter planes. They did Vietnam stuff as well. At a certain point, they made Vietnam figures. Again, the figures aren't much to write home about. I think probably Tony is rightfully saying Action Man as well was very accurate when they did their historical stuff as well. Too true, Tony. Too true. I think the reason that I forget that a lot, Tony, is because Action Man also had its internal mythology as well that it translated into toys. So yes, they had the Escape from Colditz playset, which I have the re-release of, and yes, but they also had the Scorpion tank that wasn't from World War II, if I recall. It was like a later tank, contemporary but a later tank, and they had the helicopter and the all that kind of stuff that was more contemporary. It was more 70s type stuff. That's probably why I forget. It's mainly because when he said historically accurate, I was thinking of a toy line that only concerned itself with a historical period rather than ran a gamut, as it were.
And that's where the question more or less led. I was leading you to that. So I would say that both answers would be accurate. And I was hoping Tony would counter with Action Man.
I'm not trying to antagonize Tony ever. I would never do that. But I will say this, Tony. I will say this, Tony. You had an Action Man Battle of Britain pilot, but they never gave him a fighter plane to fly.
So and we're still having that problem.
We are.
Where are the vehicles?
So
where are the play sets?
Yeah. So when I see a toy line that did have, I freely admit bias. When I see a toy line that made a 118 Spitfire, it's going to be hard for me to remember any other toy line after that for historical purposes. I'm going to be like, Spitfire.
I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. Like we all have those things. Like I personally am partial to, mini guns, your Gatling gun, like I like those very, very much. I'm not going to speak about certain toy lines that failed miserably with their Nerf version of that. That's okay. But everyone has their biases.
But Analog, I love Action Man. Don't ever think I don't. I'm not trying to take anything away from Action Man. I cannot wait to do that video with you about the Escape from Colditz set. I'm gunning for it. So, yes, Action Man is the shiz.
Absolutely. So, without drastically changing the subject, I think we've come to a nice impasse here, and I don't want to squeeze blood out of our collective turnips, so I'm not going to do that. So I want to say it was an absolute pleasure to have you. We've had a couple conversations, and it's always fun to talk to you, but I've always wanted to kind of pick your brain a little bit about all the other stuff. So I'm glad that I exploited this opportunity for that purpose, but we're going to have you back for a more traditional conversation sometime.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I just want to say thank you so much for not just being a guest here, but being a friend and an inspiration, and for everything you do for this community. I don't think enough people say it out loud enough that if there were not a Michael French and RetroBlasting, there are perhaps scores of us that would not have allowed ourselves to rediscover the joys of our childhood and really champion consumerism in a positive way, to be conscious of what the industry is doing and not doing correctly. So you really are, in my opinion, the heart and soul of the adult collector and the enthusiast, and I cannot thank you enough for that, my friend. Truly, my hat is off. It would come off, but headset is a thing. So.
I agree. I really appreciate that. I really appreciate that. That's very kind. Thank you. People tell me all the time that they don't know how I'm still going because they see the stuff that happens in the background for 9 years, and they say, I don't know how you keep going. I don't know how I would even start a channel at this point or endure a tenth of what you put up with on a daily basis. And so to hear things like that is very galvanizing. Thank you.
Well, like I said, I don't think you hear it enough. As we've often said, there's very loud vocal minorities, and it's easy for someone who is an enthusiast or a friend to forget that. A friend of mine has been saying every day on social media for 15 years, don't forget to check on your strong friend.
Right.
So we'll always be there to check on you. We just got to get better at it, my friend.
Thanks. I appreciate that. I really do.
So
I really do.
And I appreciate your time and your energy, and I will let you get back to recharging the energy. Chat, thank you. You were amazing. I didn't bring up nearly as many comments as I normally would. You guys have been here before. But the fact is, when I get into a good conversation, I just got to go with it. So I appreciate your appreciation. I want to thank everyone for the generous tips and donations, and for most of all, your time and dedication to this kind of content. We'll have more on the way at a later time. Thank you all for being here. We are out of here.